She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even ask a single question. When the billionaire looked at the elegant young woman standing beside him, smiled proudly, and declared before hundreds of guests, "She's everything I wanted," every head in the ballroom turned to his wife. Some expected tears. Others expected anger. A few even reached for their phones, hoping to capture the beginning of a scandal that would dominate tomorrow's headlines. But instead, his wife simply nodded. Not because she approved, not because she was defeated, and certainly not because she didn't care. She nodded because she had discovered a secret weeks earlier, one that her husband himself didn't know yet. A secret so profound that, before this night was over, it would completely change the way everyone in that ballroom understood love, marriage, success, and the quiet sacrifices people make for the ones they love. The billionaire believed he was introducing the future. His wife already knew the truth about the past, and that truth was about to rewrite both of their lives forever. Have you ever watched two people who seem to have everything, wealth, respect, success, a beautiful home, and wondered what their lives were really like once the front door closed? Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you stopped telling them how lonely you had become? Or perhaps you've been the person so consumed by building a better future that you didn't realize the person you were building it for was quietly slipping away. If you've ever experienced any of those moments, this story may stay with you long after it ends. Because tonight isn't about betrayal. It isn't about revenge. And it isn't about another woman stealing someone else's husband. It's about something far more common and far more dangerous. The slow, almost invisible distance that grows between two people who never stopped loving each other, but gradually stopped seeing each other. Before we begin, welcome to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. Whether you're joining us for the very first time or you're one of our returning family members, thank you for being here. If you enjoy heartfelt American love stories that leave you with meaningful life lessons, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and turn on the notification bell. Also, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love welcoming new members to our storytelling family. Now, let's travel to one unforgettable evening in downtown Chicago. Crystal chandeliers bathed the grand ballroom of the Whitmore Foundation Innovation Gala in warm golden light. Chicago's most influential business leaders mingled with politicians, philanthropists, journalists, and celebrities. Waiters moved gracefully through the crowd carrying silver trays topped with sparkling glasses. A string quartet played softly in the background. Everything about the evening spoke of elegance. And at the center of it all stood Benjamin Ben Whitmore. At 43, Ben was the billionaire everyone admired. Magazine covers called him America's visionary builder. Business schools taught case studies about the company he had built from nothing. Employees respected him. Investors trusted him. Competitors envied him. To the outside world, Ben Whitmore had achieved what most people only dreamed about. But success has a strange way of hiding the things money can never repair. Standing just a few feet away from him was the woman who had walked beside him long before the headlines, the skyscrapers, and the billions. His wife, Naomi Whitmore. She wasn't trying to attract attention. She never had to. In a graceful midnight blue gown, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that came not from wealth, but from wisdom earned over 2 decades of marriage. Many guests smiled as they greeted her. Some whispered that she was one of the kindest women in Chicago. Others admired the literacy foundation she had built, helping thousands of children discover the joy of reading. What almost no one noticed was the gentle sadness hidden behind her warm smile. It wasn't the sadness of someone who had been betrayed. It was the sadness of someone who had spent years hoping that tomorrow would be different. Years hoping the man she loved would finally look up from everything he was building and notice the life quietly waiting beside him. Then came the announcement. The ballroom fell silent as Ben stepped onto the stage. He thanked the guests, celebrated another successful year, shared exciting plans for international expansion. Then he invited one final person to join him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with unmistakable pride, "I'd like you to meet the brilliant strategist who's helping lead our company's next chapter." A poised young woman in an elegant ivory dress walked confidently onto the stage. Claire Donovan. The applause was immediate. Ben smiled at her, then turned back toward the audience. Without hesitation, he said the words that would leave the room frozen. "She's everything I wanted." For one heartbeat, time itself seemed to stop. The applause faded. Eyes drifted across the ballroom until they landed on Naomi. Waiting, watching, wondering what she would do. Would she walk out? Would she confront him? Would 20 years of marriage collapse in front of hundreds of witnesses? Instead, Naomi looked first at Claire, then at her husband. A faint, almost peaceful smile touched her lips, and she simply nodded. No one in that ballroom understood what that nod truly meant. Not the reporters, not the investors, not Claire, not even Ben. Because hidden beneath that quiet gesture was a secret Naomi had been carrying alone, a truth she had chosen not to reveal until the right moment. And when that secret finally came to light, it wouldn't expose an affair. It would expose something far more painful, and perhaps far more powerful. So stay with us, because what happens next isn't just about a billionaire, his wife, or the woman standing beside him. It's about a lesson that every marriage, every relationship, and every heart can learn before it's too late. The ballroom remained wrapped in stunned silence. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances. Others forced polite smiles, pretending nothing unusual had happened. Across the room, whispered conversations began spreading faster than the music could fill the space. Did you hear what he just said? Everything he wanted? Poor Naomi. Do you think they're getting divorced? Journalists subtly lifted their phones, careful not to attract attention. A few photographers adjusted their camera lenses, hoping to capture the expression on Naomi Whitmore's face. But there was nothing dramatic to photograph. She hadn't broken down. She hadn't stormed out. She hadn't embarrassed her husband. Instead, Naomi stood with the same quiet grace that had made people admire her for years. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter, thanked him with a gentle smile, and continued greeting guests as though nothing unusual had happened. To everyone watching, she looked calm. Only one person knew how much strength that calm required. It was Naomi herself. The truth was, Ben's words hadn't broken her heart that evening. Her heart had begun breaking years earlier. Not all at once. Not because of betrayal, but because of something much quieter. Something most couples never notice until it's already become part of everyday life. Neglect. Not intentional neglect. The kind that slowly grows between two people who love each other, but become consumed by responsibilities, ambitions, deadlines, and routines. It doesn't arrive with loud arguments. It arrives through missed dinners, cancelled holidays, half-finished conversations, promises of next weekend, text messages replacing meaningful talks. Eventually, silence begins to feel normal. 3 years earlier, neither Ben nor Naomi owned anything worth bragging about. They met at the University of Illinois. Ben was studying engineering while working evening shifts delivering pizzas to pay his tuition. Naomi was studying English literature and spent weekends tutoring children at a neighborhood community center. Their first conversation happened completely by accident. Ben rushed into the university library carrying a stack of books so high he couldn't see where he was going. Naturally, he walked straight into Naomi. Books scattered across the polished floor. Pens rolled beneath nearby tables. Students looked up in annoyance. "Oh no," Ben groaned, dropping to one knee. "I'm so sorry." Instead of getting angry, Naomi laughed, not loudly, just enough to make Ben forget how embarrassed he felt. "It's all right," she said, picking up one of his notebooks. "You've got enough books here to build another library." Ben chuckled. "I've been told I over-prepare." She handed him the notebook. "I don't think preparation is the problem." "Oh? I think you need to learn to slow down." Neither of them realized it then. But that single sentence would become the lesson Ben spent the next 20 years forgetting. Their friendship developed effortlessly. Neither of them had much money. Their dates weren't expensive. Friday evenings usually meant sharing one large pepperoni pizza because buying two simply wasn't an option. Sometimes they'd spend hours walking along the shoreline of Lake Michigan. Other evenings they'd sit on a park bench talking about books, family, dreams, and the future they hoped to build together. Ben often spoke about becoming an architect whose buildings would inspire generations. "I don't want people to remember my name," he once told Naomi. "I want them to walk into one of my buildings and feel hopeful." Naomi smiled. "Then promise me something." "What is it?" "Don't spend so much time building places that you forget to build a life." Ben reached for her hand. "I could never forget that." At 21, he believed every word. Life has a remarkable way of testing promises made during peaceful seasons. After graduation, Ben struggled to attract investors. Banks rejected his business plans. Construction firms dismissed his ideas as unrealistic. Friends encouraged him to settle for a secure engineering job. Even Naomi's parents quietly wondered if she should marry a man chasing such uncertain dreams. But Naomi never questioned his potential. When Ben finally decided to start his own architecture company, he didn't even have enough money to rent a tiny office. One evening, Naomi placed a folder on the kitchen table. Inside were the documents to her late grandmother's small house. "I can sell it," she said calmly. Ben stared at her. "No. It will give us enough money to start." "I can't let you do that." Naomi smiled. "It's only a house." "No. It became a home because your grandmother filled it with love." She gently pushed the folder closer to him. "And now it'll help us build another home." Years later, whenever reporters asked Ben about the biggest investment behind Whitmore architecture, he mentioned venture capital, he mentioned business loans, he mentioned strategic partnerships. Very few people knew that the company had truly begun because one woman believed in a dream more than she believed in owning property. Naomi never corrected anyone. She wasn't interested in recognition. Watching Ben succeed had always been enough. Or at least, she thought it would be. The company grew faster than anyone imagined. One project became 5. 5 became 20. 20 became hundreds. Soon Ben was traveling constantly. New York, Boston, Seattle, Dallas, London, Singapore. His calendar became impossible. Private jets replaced economy flights. Luxury hotels replaced modest roadside motels. Business magazines called him one of America's most influential entrepreneurs. Awards filled shelves. Fortune followed success. Everything they had once dreamed about became reality. Except, dreams have a curious habit of changing once they come true. The first wedding anniversary, Ben missed. Naomi understood. The investors need him, she whispered to herself. The second, she understood again. By the 5th missed anniversary, understanding had quietly transformed into loneliness. She never asked for designer jewelry, never wanted another mansion, never cared about luxury cars. The things she missed couldn't be bought. Saturday breakfasts, long evening conversations, road trips without an itinerary, watching old films together on rainy afternoons, laughing over burnt pancakes in their first tiny apartment. She didn't miss the life they couldn't afford. She missed the people they had been while living it. Meanwhile, Ben genuinely believed he was loving Naomi the best way he knew how. Every successful project, every promotion, every investment, every long night at the office, every international contract. He believed he was doing it all for her. If I work harder today, he'd often tell himself, we'll finally have time tomorrow. But tomorrow kept moving. 1 year became 5. 5 became 10, then 20. Without either of them recognizing it, their marriage had slowly become another responsibility to manage instead of a relationship to nurture. Back inside the ballroom, Naomi watched Ben, laughing with investors near the stage. His smile looked sincere. She remembered when she had once been the reason behind that smile. Not because she wanted to be the center of his world again, but because she missed being part of it. She wasn't angry. Anger had faded years earlier. What remained was quieter. Grief, not for a marriage that had ended, but for one that had slowly become unfamiliar while both of them were still living inside it. As she raised her glass for another sip of sparkling water, a gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. Naomi, she turned. Standing before her was Eleanor Hastings, an 80-year-old philanthropist and longtime family friend. Eleanor had known Ben and Naomi since the earliest days of the company. Unlike everyone else that evening, she wasn't looking at Naomi with curiosity. She was looking at her with understanding. Eleanor gently rested a hand over Naomi's. My dear. Naomi smiled reassuringly. I'm all right. Eleanor held her gaze for a long moment. Then she quietly replied, No, you've simply become very good at carrying pain without allowing anyone else to help carry it. The words settled deep inside Naomi's heart. Because for the first time that evening, someone had looked beyond her smile. Someone had noticed what even her own husband no longer saw. Across the ballroom, Ben glanced in Naomi's direction. Their eyes met for only a moment. He smiled politely. She smiled back just as gently. Neither of them realized that before this remarkable evening came to an end, a truth buried beneath years of silence would begin changing the course of their marriage forever. And neither of them could have imagined that the quiet nod everyone misunderstood was only the beginning of a much deeper story. The orchestra eased into another elegant melody. Conversations slowly returned. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter resurfaced in scattered pockets around the ballroom. To anyone walking in at that moment, the Whitmore Foundation Innovation Gala looked exactly as it was supposed to, a glamorous celebration attended by Chicago's most influential business leaders. But beneath the polished smiles, something had shifted. The room had heard Ben Whitmore's words. Whether they understood them or not was another matter entirely. Ben stepped down from the stage to a wave of congratulations. Outstanding presentation. The expansion into Europe is brilliant. You've outdone yourself again, Ben. He thanked each guest with his usual confidence. His smile never faltered. Yet, somewhere in the back of his mind, he noticed something unusual. People weren't only congratulating him. Many of them glanced toward Naomi before speaking, almost as if they expected her reaction to explain what his words truly meant. He brushed the thought aside. Surely they were overthinking a simple introduction. After all, Claire was exactly what he'd described, A brilliant strategist helping lead the company into its next phase. Nothing more. Claire Donovan accepted a glass of sparkling water from a waiter before making her way toward Ben. She waited until the crowd around him had thinned. "Congratulations," she said warmly. "You handled that beautifully." "Thanks." Ben smiled. "I've been looking forward to introducing you to everyone." Claire nodded. "I appreciate that." She hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you notice how quiet the room became after you said I was everything you wanted?" Ben frowned slightly. "I assumed they were surprised." "They were." Claire lowered her voice. "But not for the reason you think." Ben looked confused. "I was talking about the business." "I know." She smiled gently. "But words have a way of traveling further than our intentions." Ben glanced across the ballroom. Naomi was speaking with several board members from her literacy foundation. She looked calm, graceful, exactly as she always did. "I don't think Naomi misunderstood." Claire followed his gaze. "No. I don't think she misunderstood either." Ben looked back at her. "What do you mean?" Claire chose her words carefully. "I think she understood perfectly." That answer stayed with him long after Claire excused herself to greet another guest. Across the ballroom, Naomi was surrounded by supporters of her literacy foundation. They congratulated her on another successful year. One teacher hugged her tightly. "You've helped over 12,000 children learn to read." Naomi smiled. "They did the hard work. I simply believed they could." A young principal standing nearby said, "My students still talk about the reading program you started 5 years ago. It changed our school." Naomi thanked him sincerely. As the conversation continued, she realized something. Nearly everyone wanted to discuss her foundation, her work, her ideas. No one mentioned Ben's comment. Not because they hadn't heard it, because they respected her enough not to turn her marriage into gossip. She appreciated that more than they realized. Eventually, she slipped quietly onto the terrace overlooking the Chicago skyline. The summer breeze carried the distant sounds of traffic far below. Lake Michigan shimmered beneath the city lights. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply. For just a moment, the noise disappeared. The terrace door opened softly behind her. "I thought I'd find you here." Naomi turned. Claire stood in the doorway. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." Claire joined her beside the stone railing. For several moments, neither woman spoke. They simply admired the city stretching endlessly before them. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." Naomi looked surprised. "For what?" "I think my arrival complicated your evening." Naomi shook her head. "No, you didn't." Claire looked uncertain. "I saw the way people looked at you." "They'll stop." "I'm not so sure." Naomi smiled gently. "People enjoy creating stories when they don't know the truth." Claire laughed softly. "That's probably true." Another quiet pause settled between them. Then Claire asked, "Can I ask you something personal?" "You may." "When Ben introduced me." "Why?" "Did you nod?" Naomi's eyes remained fixed on the skyline. Her answer came slowly. "Because fighting the wrong battle never saves the right relationship." Claire looked at her with quiet curiosity. Naomi continued, "If I had reacted the way everyone expected, they would have remembered my anger." She smiled faintly. "But they would never have understood my heart." Claire remained silent. Then Naomi added, "My marriage isn't threatened by another woman. It's threatened by years of conversations we never had." Claire swallowed quietly. She suddenly understood that the woman standing beside her possessed a strength few people ever developed. One of the greatest lessons life teaches is this: relationships rarely collapse in a single dramatic moment. They weaken through small disappointments left unspoken, tiny misunderstandings ignored, dreams postponed, affection assumed instead of expressed. People often spend years searching for the one event that ruined everything, when, in reality, it was hundreds of unnoticed moments. Moments that could have been healed by a simple conversation. Inside the ballroom, Ben found himself unusually distracted. He answered questions automatically, smiled for photographs, discussed investment opportunities, yet his attention kept drifting toward the terrace, toward Naomi, toward the conversation she was having with Claire. He couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was because Claire's earlier words still echoed in his thoughts. Words have a way of traveling further than our intentions. As another round of speeches began, Ben quietly stepped away from the crowd. On his way toward the terrace, he noticed an elderly maintenance worker kneeling beside a shattered champagne flute. The man carefully swept each tiny piece of glass into a dustpan. Most guests walked past without acknowledging him. Ben almost did the same. Then the gentleman looked up and smiled. Good evening, Mr. Whitmore. Good evening. Congratulations on another successful event. Thank you. The older man glanced around the magnificent ballroom. I've worked in this hotel for 32 years. Ben smiled politely. Then you've probably seen some incredible evenings. Oh, I have. The man chuckled. I've also learned something. Ben paused. What's that? The maintenance worker rested both hands on the broom. The happiest couples I see aren't the ones sitting at the most expensive tables. Ben listened. They're the ones who never stop looking for each other across the room. Those words landed somewhere deep inside him. Almost instinctively, he turned. His eyes searched the ballroom, then the terrace. There she was, Naomi, standing quietly beneath the evening sky. He realized something uncomfortable. He couldn't remember the last time he'd looked for her first when entering a room. The thought unsettled him. Life often delivers its greatest wisdom through ordinary people. Teachers, neighbors, taxi drivers, maintenance workers, grandparents, people whose names rarely appear in newspapers. Education doesn't only happen inside classrooms. Sometimes, the most important lessons arrive disguised as ordinary conversations. Ben thanked the gentleman and continued walking. But the man's words followed him. The happiest couples never stop looking for each other. Had he stopped looking? Or had he simply assumed Naomi would always be there? Claire noticed Ben approaching. I should leave you two alone. Naomi smiled warmly. It was lovely talking with you. You too. Claire walked back inside, leaving husband and wife alone beneath the glowing Chicago skyline. Ben leaned against the stone railing. Beautiful night. It is. You've always loved this view. Naomi nodded. It reminds me how small our problems become when we stop long enough to breathe. He smiled. I haven't heard you say that in years. You haven't slowed down long enough to hear it. There was no accusation in her voice, only truth. And, somehow, truth hurt more than blame. Ben took a slow breath. About what I said on stage. Naomi turned toward him. I know exactly what you meant. You do? Yes. He looked relieved. I've been worried people misunderstood. They probably did. But you didn't? She smiled gently. No. You were introducing someone important to your company. Exactly. He nodded. I'm glad you understand. Naomi looked into his eyes for several quiet seconds. Then she asked a question so softly that it almost disappeared into the wind. Ben? When was the last time you introduced me with that much pride? He opened his mouth, closed it again. His mind searched desperately. Her literacy award, their 20th anniversary, the opening of her new community library, her national education recognition. He remembered attending those events. But had he celebrated her with the same excitement he reserved for business achievements? He honestly didn't know. The silence between them became his answer. Naomi didn't press him. She simply rested her hand gently over his. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Then she turned and walked back toward the ballroom. Ben remained standing beneath the stars, watching the woman who had believed in him before anyone else, the woman who had sacrificed more than anyone knew, the woman he had never stopped loving, yet somehow had slowly stopped seeing. For the first time in years, Benjamin Whitmore asked himself a question no investor, journalist, or business magazine had ever dared to ask. If I built everything I dreamed of, how did I almost lose sight of the person who helped me build it? That question would stay with him long after the lights of the gala faded. Because some questions don't simply demand answers, they demand transformation. What do you think? Did Ben truly make an innocent mistake, or do you believe his words revealed something much deeper about the state of his marriage? And if you were in Naomi's place, would you have reacted differently, or do you think her quiet nod was the strongest response she could have given? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read your comments every day, and I'd love to know what you think. Your perspective might also encourage someone else who's going through a similar situation. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring story filled with love, life lessons, and unforgettable moments. And if you know a couple, a friend, or a family member who needs this reminder that love isn't just about providing, it's about being present, share this story with them. It might start a conversation that changes someone's life. Now, take a deep breath, because in Chapter 2, the silence after the gala becomes louder than any argument, and a long-hidden secret from Naomi's past begins to reveal why she didn't cry when everyone expected her to. Let's continue. The drive home was unusually quiet. Chicago's skyline slowly disappeared behind them as Ben guided the sleek black sedan through streets still glowing beneath the city's midnight lights. Rain had begun to fall, not heavily, just enough to leave tiny droplets scattered across the windshield while the wipers moved back and forth in a steady rhythm. Normally, Naomi loved rainy nights. She often rolled the window down just enough to breathe in the cool air. She would point out reflections dancing across the pavement or admire the way the city looked softer beneath the glow of streetlights. Tonight, she simply stared through the window. Ben noticed. Several times he almost spoke. Each time, he changed his mind. Silence had never felt this loud. The radio remained off. Even the hum of the engine seemed louder than usual. Finally, Ben cleared his throat. "You were quiet tonight." Naomi smiled faintly without looking at him. "I've learned that not every thought needs to become an argument." "I wasn't expecting an argument." "No?" He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I just wanted to know what you were thinking." She watched raindrops race each other down the glass. "I was thinking about us." Ben waited. When she didn't continue, he asked gently, "And?" Naomi released a slow breath. "I was wondering when we became so good at talking to everyone except each other." Her words settled inside the car, like another passenger. Ben had no immediate answer, because somewhere deep down, he had wondered the same thing. They arrived home just after 11. Their home overlooked Lake Michigan, sitting behind elegant wrought-iron gates and surrounded by towering oak trees. Architectural magazines had once named it one of the most beautiful private residences in Illinois. Visitors admired its grand entrance, its soaring ceilings and walls lined with artwork collected from around the world. It was breathtaking. It was luxurious. And lately, it had felt far too large for only two people. As Ben unlocked the front door, Naomi paused in the hallway. She looked around quietly. This house used to feel so full. Ben looked surprised. "It still is." She smiled sadly. "Furniture fills rooms." She rested a hand against the staircase railing. "People fill homes." Without another word, she walked upstairs. Ben remained standing near the entrance. For reasons he couldn't explain, the house suddenly felt colder. Naomi changed into comfortable clothes before stepping onto the balcony outside their bedroom. The rain had stopped. The air smelled fresh. Lake Michigan stretched into darkness beyond the garden. She wrapped a light cardigan around her shoulders and closed her eyes. 20 years. She whispered the number to herself. 20 years. Not once had she questioned whether Ben loved her. That had never been the problem. The problem was simpler, and somehow much harder to solve. He loved her, but he no longer noticed her. There was a difference, a painful one. Inside his home office, Ben loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of water. Normally, after a successful gala, he'd still be answering congratulatory emails. Tonight, he couldn't focus. His eyes drifted to a framed photograph sitting on the corner of his desk. It had been taken 22 years earlier. Two university students, standing beside a tiny food truck after sharing milkshakes. Ben's arm wrapped around Naomi, both of them laughing at something neither could now remember. He picked up the photograph. When had they stopped laughing like that? When had every conversation become about calendars, meetings, flights, deadlines, charity events, staff, investments? He honestly couldn't remember. His thoughts were interrupted by a notification on his phone. A message from Claire. "Great event tonight. I hope I didn't unintentionally create any discomfort." Ben stared at the screen, then typed, "None at all." He paused, deleted it, typed again, "Thank you for everything you did tonight. Get home safely." She replied, almost immediately, "Thank you. Good night, Ben." Nothing inappropriate, nothing personal, just two colleagues ending a successful evening. Yet Ben couldn't shake the feeling that the evening had been anything but successful. Upstairs, Naomi opened a drawer in her bedside table. Hidden beneath old birthday cards and family photographs lay a worn leather journal. She hadn't opened it in almost a year. She slowly turned the first page. The earliest entries were filled with hope. "Ben got our first office today. He worked 18 hours straight, but he still brought me flowers. We ate dinner on the floor because we hadn't bought furniture yet. We're exhausted and unbelievably happy." Naomi smiled through moist eyes. She turned another page. The entries slowly changed. "He missed dinner again. Another cancelled holiday. He promised next month would be different. I'm proud of him. I just miss him." Another page. "Today I realized I couldn't remember the last time we watched a movie together." Then another. "I don't need more gifts. I need more of him." Naomi gently closed the journal. Not because she couldn't continue reading, because she already knew how the story unfolded. One of the greatest mistakes people make in relationships is assuming love speaks for itself. It doesn't. Love has its own language. Time, attention, listening, kindness, curiosity, affection. Without those things, Even genuine love can begin to feel invisible. The following morning arrived quietly. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows. Ben was already dressed for work when Naomi walked downstairs. He stood by the coffee machine, reading emails on his tablet. Without looking up, he smiled. "Morning." "Good morning." He poured coffee into her favorite mug, exactly the way she liked it. 1 teaspoon of sugar, a splash of oat milk. He placed it on the counter. She smiled appreciatively. "Thank you." Small gestures still existed between them. That was what made everything so confusing. They weren't cruel to each other. They weren't disrespectful. They simply lived beside each other more often than with each other. As Ben reached for his car keys, Naomi spoke. "Do you have a busy day?" He laughed softly. "When don't I?" She nodded. "I suppose that's true." He checked his watch. Board meeting at 9. Conference call with London. Lunch with investors. Interview at 2. Dinner with the development committee tonight. She smiled politely. "You have every hour planned." He smiled back. "Occupational hazard." She hesitated. "What about tomorrow evening?" "What about it?" "I was thinking." She stopped. Ben noticed. "What?" "I thought maybe we could have dinner together." "I'll check my calendar." The words escaped before he thought about them. Naomi's smile faded almost imperceptibly. "Of course." Ben immediately realized what he'd done. "No, I mean, it's all right." She picked up her handbag. "I should get going too." He stepped toward her. "Naomi." She kissed his cheek gently. "Have a good day." Then she left. The front door closed softly behind her. Ben remained standing in the kitchen. One sentence echoed through his mind. "I'll check my calendar." He hadn't meant it to sound dismissive, but intentions didn't erase impact. For years, Naomi had adjusted her life around his schedule. Perhaps what she had been asking for wasn't dinner. Perhaps she had simply wanted to know there was still room for her in his life without needing an appointment. Ben slowly lowered himself into one of the kitchen chairs. His untouched coffee had already gone cold, and for the first time in a very long time, he wondered whether the biggest problem in his marriage wasn't that he had stopped loving Naomi. It was that he had become so busy building their future, that he had forgotten how to live in their present. Naomi drove across the city with the windows cracked just enough to let the cool morning breeze drift into her car. She usually enjoyed the drive to the literacy center. It gave her time to prepare for the day. Today, however, her mind remained on the conversation in the kitchen. Or rather, the conversation that never really happened. She wasn't upset, because Ben had another meeting. His work had always demanded extraordinary commitment. What hurt was something much smaller. When she asked him to have dinner, his first instinct wasn't to say yes. It was to check his calendar. Somewhere along the way, spending time with his wife had become another appointment to fit between meetings. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel before deliberately relaxing her hands. Years ago, she had promised herself she would never allow resentment to become the loudest voice inside her heart. Resentment didn't heal relationships. Communication did. The problem was, communication required 2 people who were equally willing to listen. The Whitmore Literacy Foundation occupied a renovated brick building on Chicago's South Side. Bright murals covered the exterior walls. Children's artwork decorated the entrance. Instead of marble floors and crystal chandeliers, the building welcomed visitors with colorful bookshelves, reading corners, and walls filled with handwritten thank you notes from families whose lives had been changed through education. The moment Naomi stepped inside, the atmosphere changed. "Miss Naomi!" A little girl, no older than 8, came running across the lobby with a book clutched tightly against her chest. "I finished it!" Naomi knelt until they were eye level. "You did?" The little girl nodded enthusiastically. "All by myself." Naomi smiled. "I'm proud of you. Can I borrow another one?" "You've earned 2. The child's face lit up with excitement before she hurried back toward the library shelves. Watching her leave, Naomi couldn't help smiling. Moments like these reminded her why she had chosen this path. Success wasn't always measured in headlines. Sometimes it was measured by a child discovering confidence 1 page at a time. Inside the conference room, her staff had already gathered for the weekly planning meeting. "Morning, everyone." "Morning, Naomi." Her assistant, Olivia, handed her a folder. "We've received confirmation." Naomi looked up. "For what?" "The city has approved funding for the summer reading program." The room erupted into applause. Naomi laughed. "That's wonderful." Olivia grinned. "We'll be able to reach almost 3,000 additional children this year." Naomi closed the folder for a moment. "This is why we never gave up." She looked around the room. Every extra child who learns to read gains more than words. They gain choices. They gain confidence. They gain a future. Her team nodded. They had heard her say similar things before, but she believed them every single time. Education had always been more than books to Naomi. She believed reading taught empathy. It allowed children to experience lives different from their own. It encouraged patience, curiosity, understanding. She often told volunteers, "A child who learns to read doesn't just discover stories, they discover possibilities." Across the city, Ben entered the executive boardroom on the 34th floor of Whitmore Architecture. A dozen executives were already seated around the polished walnut table. Screens displayed financial projections and expansion plans. Claire stood near the presentation screen, reviewing notes. "Good morning." "Morning, Ben." The meeting began promptly. For nearly an hour, they discussed construction projects, international partnerships, and market forecasts. Ben usually thrived in these conversations. Today, his concentration drifted. Ben? He looked up. One of the directors was waiting. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" Claire quietly answered on his behalf, summarizing the proposal with remarkable clarity. The meeting continued. But Claire noticed something unusual. Ben had asked for information to be repeated 3 times. That had never happened before. When the meeting ended, Claire knocked gently on Ben's office door. "You have a minute?" "Of course." She stepped inside. "You seemed distracted this morning." Ben leaned back in his chair. "Was I that obvious?" "Only if someone knows you well enough." He smiled faintly. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated. "Can I speak honestly?" "I'd expect nothing less." Claire folded her hands. "I've worked with some extraordinary leaders. The best ones all have one thing in common. They eventually realize success solves business problems." She paused. "But it doesn't automatically solve personal ones." Ben looked thoughtfully through the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking downtown Chicago. "I've been thinking about that." Claire nodded. "I suspected as much." He turned back toward her. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When you first met Naomi, what was your impression of her?" Claire smiled immediately. "She's remarkable." "In what way?" "She makes people feel important." Ben listened quietly. "I watched her last night. Every person who spoke with her walked away smiling. Children, teachers, donors, waiters, even the hotel staff." Claire shook her head with genuine admiration. "That's not charisma. That's kindness." Ben lowered his eyes. "You know, I can't remember the last compliment I gave her." Claire didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked a simple question. "When was the last time you thanked her?" Ben frowned. "For what?" Claire looked surprised. "For everything." The question lingered in the room long after she left. Meanwhile, Naomi spent the afternoon visiting one of the Foundation's partner schools. Inside a second-grade classroom, children sat in a circle, each taking turns reading aloud. Some stumbled over difficult words. Others read confidently. When one little boy stopped halfway through a sentence, lowering his book in frustration, Naomi walked over and sat beside him. "I can't do it," he whispered. She smiled gently. "Do you know how babies learn to walk?" He shook his head. "They fall. A lot. They don't stop because falling isn't failure. It's practice." She pointed to the page. "Reading works the same way." The boy took a deep breath and tried again. This time, he finished the paragraph. His classmates burst into applause. His smile stretched from ear to ear. As Naomi stood, his teacher whispered, "That's why the children love you." Naomi smiled softly. They don't need someone who believes they're already perfect. They need someone who believes they'll get there. That evening, Ben arrived home earlier than usual. The house was unusually quiet. He loosened his tie and walked into the kitchen. A handwritten note rested on the island. "Dinner is in the oven. Don't wait for me. The Foundation is hosting family reading night. Love, Naomi." He read the note twice, then looked at the empty dining room. For years, Naomi had rearranged her schedule around his. Tonight, she had made plans without expecting him to be available. It wasn't done out of spite. It was something far sadder. She had stopped expecting him to say yes. Ben slowly sat at the table. The house felt impossibly still. He suddenly realized that loneliness doesn't always begin when someone leaves. Sometimes, it begins when they stop expecting you to show up. For the first time in years, Ben looked at his watch. Not to see what meeting came next, but to wonder if it was too late to drive across the city and surprise his wife. Ben stood motionless in the kitchen, the handwritten note still resting in his hand. For years, notes like this had been ordinary. Meeting ran late. Dinners in the fridge. Safe travels. Don't work too hard. He had read hundreds of them without thinking twice. Tonight, This one felt different, not because of what it said, because of what it didn't. There was no question asking when he'd be home. No, I'll wait for you. No suggestion that she hoped they might spend the evening together. It was simply information, a woman living her life, without expecting her husband to be part of it. Ben looked toward the dining table. 2 place settings, 1 chair already pushed in neatly, the other left for him. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel peaceful. It felt empty. He glanced at his watch. Family reading night had started 30 minutes earlier. The community center was only a 20-minute drive away. His first instinct was to dismiss the idea. He was still wearing his business suit. He had emails waiting. Tomorrow's presentation wasn't finished. There were contracts to review before morning. Then another thought interrupted him. Those things would still be there tomorrow. Would Naomi's invitation? He grabbed his car keys before he could change his mind. Across the city, laughter echoed through the Whitmore Literacy Foundation. Children sat cross-legged on colorful rugs, while parents filled rows of folding chairs. Books were stacked on every table. Volunteers dressed as storybook characters greeted families at the entrance. The atmosphere was warm, simple, joyful. Naomi moved effortlessly through the room, stopping to greet nearly every child by name. "Hi, Mrs. Whitmore." "Miss Naomi. Look, I finished my reading log." She celebrated every accomplishment, as though it were the greatest achievement in the world. One little girl proudly held up a certificate. "I read 20 books this summer." Naomi placed a hand over her heart. 20? That's incredible. The little girl's father smiled. She wouldn't read anything before joining your program. Naomi knelt beside the child. "And now?" The girl grinned. "I want to be an author." Naomi laughed softly. "Then I expect you to sign my copy one day." The child nodded with complete seriousness. "I will." At the back of the room, Olivia adjusted the microphone before walking over. "We've got almost 200 families tonight." Naomi looked around proudly. "That's wonderful." Olivia smiled. "You've built something special." Naomi shook her head. "We all have." "No." Olivia looked around the crowded room. "You gave people permission to believe education could change lives." Naomi glanced toward the children reading together. "I've learned something over the years." "What's that?" "Children remember how adults make them feel long before they remember what adults say." Olivia nodded thoughtfully. "So do spouses." The words landed unexpectedly. Naomi smiled faintly. "They do." Meanwhile, Ben pulled into the community center car park. He had driven there countless times over the years. Ribbon cuttings, fundraisers, annual galas. Yet he couldn't remember the last time he had attended an ordinary program. Not because cameras would be there, not because donors expected him, just because Naomi cared about it. He switched off the engine. For a moment, he simply sat there. Through the windows, he could hear laughter, children cheering, someone reading dramatically over a microphone. He smiled despite himself. Then, he walked inside. The volunteer at the welcome table looked up. "Oh?" Her eyes widened. "Mr. Whitmore." Ben smiled politely. "Good evening. We weren't expecting you." "I wasn't expecting me either." She laughed. "Mrs. Whitmore is in the main hall." As Ben walked through the building, colorful posters lined the walls. "Read today. Lead tomorrow." Books build dreams. Photographs filled another wall. Hundreds of children. Graduation ceremonies. Reading competitions. Family workshops. Naomi appeared in almost every picture, smiling, listening, encouraging. He stopped at one particular photograph. A little boy hugged Naomi while holding his first library card. Below the picture was a handwritten caption, "Because someone believed in me." Ben stared at the words longer than he expected. He quietly stepped into the hall. No one noticed him. Every chair was occupied. Parents listened, as children took turns reading short stories aloud. Near the front, Naomi sat beside a young boy who struggled through almost every sentence. She never corrected him impatiently. Instead, she waited, smiled, encouraged him to try again. Each time he stumbled, she simply said, "You're getting better. You've got this. I believe in you." Eventually the boy finished the page. The entire room applauded. His face lit up with pride. Ben found himself clapping too. He realized something uncomfortable. Naomi had spent 20 years giving other people exactly what she had quietly needed herself. Patience, encouragement, presence, belief. Educational success isn't only about intelligence. It's about creating environments where people feel safe enough to keep trying after they fail. Whether in classrooms, friendships, or marriages, growth happens where encouragement lives. Criticism may force change, but encouragement inspires it. As the program ended, families gathered around Naomi to thank her. One grandmother held both of Naomi's hands. "My grandson hated reading." She wiped away a tear. "Now he asks me to read with him every night." Naomi squeezed her hands gently. "Those are the memories he'll carry forever." The grandmother smiled. "No, he'll remember you too." Ben watched from a distance. He had seen Naomi receive awards. He had watched her give speeches to thousands. Yet somehow, this simple conversation affected him more deeply than any televised ceremony. Because here, there were no cameras, no headlines. Naomi finally turned and saw him. For a brief moment, surprise crossed her face. "Ben?" He walked toward her. "I hope I'm not interrupting." She smiled warmly. "You aren't. I finished work early." She raised an eyebrow playfully. "That's a first." He laughed. "It is." There was a slightly awkward pause. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. "I wanted to see what family reading night was like." Naomi looked genuinely pleased. "I'm glad you came." She introduced him to volunteers, teachers, and parents. Everywhere they went, people spoke passionately about Naomi's work. "You changed my daughter's confidence. My son wants to become a teacher because of your program. Our family reads together now." Ben listened quietly. Each compliment revealed another part of his wife he had admired, but perhaps never fully appreciated. As they prepared to leave, a young volunteer hurried over. "Mrs. Whitmore." Naomi turned. "You forgot your notebook." "Oh." She accepted the leather notebook with a smile. "Thank you." Ben recognized it immediately. The worn leather journal. He had seen it resting inside her bedside drawer for years. He had never asked about it. On the drive home, curiosity finally overcame him. "What do you write in there?" Naomi looked down at the journal resting in her lap. "A little of everything." "Like what?" "Thoughts. Ideas. Things I don't want to forget." He nodded. "Would you ever let me read it?" She looked out the window before answering. "One day." The answer wasn't a refusal, but it wasn't permission either. It reminded Ben of something he hadn't considered in a very long time. Every year of silence had written pages he had never read. Every disappointment, every hope, every unanswered question. Somewhere inside that journal was the story of the marriage from Naomi's perspective, and he wasn't sure he was ready to discover just how different her version might be from his own. As the city lights reflected across the windscreen, Ben realized something that both frightened and humbled him. He had spent years believing he knew everything about the woman he loved. Now, he wasn't certain he knew her at all. And perhaps, the first step towards saving their marriage wasn't convincing Naomi that he loved her. It was learning who she had become while he had been too busy to notice. The following morning, Ben woke before sunrise. For years, his mornings had followed the same routine. Wake up at 5. Exercise for 40 minutes. Answer overnight emails. Read market reports. Leave for the office before the city reached rush hour. Everything was timed. Everything was efficient. Everything had a purpose. This morning, he found himself standing in the kitchen instead. The house was still quiet. Soft orange light filtered through the windows overlooking the lake. He reached for the coffee beans before stopping. Naomi always ground the beans fresh, instead of using the pre-ground blend. "You can taste the difference," she would say with a smile. He had always smiled politely. He'd never really paid attention. Now he searched through the pantry until he found the small hand grinder she preferred. It took longer. His arms grew tired. But when the rich aroma filled the kitchen, he finally understood why she'd insisted all those years. Some things were worth slowing down for. Footsteps echoed softly on the staircase. Naomi walked into the kitchen wearing a simple cream-colored sweater and dark jeans, her hair loosely tied back. She stopped in surprise. "You're making coffee?" Ben looked up with an embarrassed smile. "I'm trying." She glanced at the scattered coffee beans across the counter. "It looks like the beans put up a fight." He laughed. They definitely won the first round. For the first time in what felt like weeks. Naomi laughed too. A genuine laugh. Not loud, not forced, just real. It lasted only a few seconds. But to Ben, it felt like hearing a favorite song he hadn't realized he'd missed. "I'll clean this up," he said. "You don't have to." "I know." He smiled. "I want to." Naomi watched quietly as he wiped the counter and swept the stray beans into his hand. It wasn't about the mess. It was about the effort. Sometimes, love wasn't expressed through grand declarations. Sometimes it looked like someone choosing to do something they had never considered before. They sat at the kitchen island with steaming mugs between them. For a while, neither spoke. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt thoughtful. Finally, Ben broke it. "I had a good time last night." Naomi smiled. So did I. I wish I'd come sooner. She traced a finger around the rim of her mug. You've always been welcome. I know. He looked down. I just didn't make the time. Naomi appreciated something she hadn't heard from him in years. He hadn't made an excuse. He hadn't blamed work. He had simply acknowledged the truth. Can I ask you something? Ben said. She nodded. When did you decide to start the Literacy Foundation? Naomi looked surprised. You've never asked me that before. I know. She leaned back slightly. It started with one student. Really? She nodded. When I was teaching middle school, there was a boy named Marcus. He was 12. Bright. Funny. But he struggled to read. Ben listened carefully. The other students teased him, so he stopped trying. One afternoon, I found him sitting alone in the library. I asked why he wasn't outside with everyone else. What did he say? Naomi's expression softened. He told me. She paused before repeating the words that had stayed with her ever since. If I don't read out loud, nobody knows how far behind I am. Ben felt something tighten in his chest. Naomi continued. I started staying after school. Just the two of us. No pressure, no embarrassment. Just books. And 6 months later, he read his first novel. A smile spread across her face. The look on his face. I'll never forget it. She looked out toward the lake. That's when I realized. Teaching children to read isn't only about words. It's about restoring dignity. Ben stared quietly into his coffee. After a long pause, he asked, Did I ever tell you how proud I am of what you've built? Naomi looked at him. No. The single word wasn't spoken with resentment, only honesty. Ben swallowed. I should have. You deserve to hear it. She studied his face for several seconds, then smiled gently. Thank you. Sometimes the words people need most aren't complicated. Sometimes they are simply, I'm proud of you. Later that morning, Ben arrived at the office carrying something he hadn't brought in years. His lunch. Normally, he met clients at expensive restaurants. Today, he cancelled every lunch appointment. His assistant looked surprised. Is everything all right? Everything's fine. I just need an hour to think. Claire noticed the change immediately. During the executive meeting, Ben listened more than he spoke. Instead of interrupting junior staff with corrections, he invited their opinions. When one young architect nervously presented an ambitious design, Ben usually would have pointed out every flaw. Instead, he asked, What inspired this idea? The young man blinked in surprise. My grandmother. She always said buildings should make people feel welcome. Ben smiled. Then don't lose that idea while we refine the design. After the meeting ended, Claire caught up with him. Can I say something? Always. You've changed. He laughed. Since yesterday. Yes. In a good way? I think so. She smiled. People don't become better leaders by proving they're the smartest person in the room. They become better leaders when they make everyone else feel capable. Ben thought about Naomi encouraging the little boy during family reading night. You've got this. I believe in you. The words echoed in his mind. Perhaps leadership and love had more in common than he'd ever realized. That afternoon, Naomi received an unexpected visitor at the foundation, Eleanor Hastings. The elderly philanthropist stepped inside carrying a small paper bag from Naomi's favorite neighborhood bakery. I brought cinnamon rolls. Naomi laughed. You remembered. I remember important things. They sat together in Naomi's office overlooking the children's reading garden. After a few minutes of casual conversation, Eleanor asked quietly, How are you really? Naomi looked down at her tea. I don't know. That's an honest answer. I've spent so many years pretending everything was all right. Sometimes I can't tell what I'm actually feeling. Eleanor reached across the desk and gently squeezed her hand. My dear. Never confuse patience with silence. Naomi looked up. There's a difference. Patience gives people room to grow. Silence gives problems room to grow. The words settled deeply inside her. For years, she had believed she was protecting her marriage by avoiding difficult conversations. Perhaps she had only been protecting the discomfort, not the relationship. That evening, Ben returned home carrying a bouquet of fresh white lilies. He hesitated at the front door. He couldn't remember the last time he brought Naomi flowers without there being a birthday, anniversary, or apology attached to them. He found her in the living room, curled up on the sofa with a novel. She looked up as he entered. For me? He smiled. They reminded me of you. Naomi accepted them carefully. They're beautiful. I know flowers don't fix anything. I wasn't trying to fix anything. I just wanted you to know. He searched for the right words. That I thought about you today. Naomi held his gaze. For years, she had dreamed of hearing something exactly like that. Yet now, instead of excitement, she felt caution. Not because she doubted his sincerity, because she had learned that lasting change isn't measured by one beautiful day. It's measured by what happens after the beautiful day ends. She smiled warmly. Thank you, Ben. As she carried the flowers to a vase, neither of them noticed the quiet lesson unfolding between them. Trust isn't rebuilt through one grand gesture. It's rebuilt through dozens of small, consistent choices made long after the moment of regret has passed. And both of them were only beginning to discover whether those choices would be enough. A week passed, not a dramatic week. There were no grand romantic gestures, no emotional declarations, no miraculous transformation. Life continued, much as it always had. Ben still went to the office. Naomi still devoted herself to the literacy foundation. The city continued moving at its usual relentless pace. But beneath the ordinary routine, something subtle had begun to change. For the first time in years, Ben was paying attention. Not just to Naomi's words, to the spaces between them, to the little habits he'd stopped noticing long ago. He noticed she always opened the curtains before making coffee because she liked greeting the sunrise. He noticed she hummed softly whenever she cooked. He noticed she still laughed at old black and white films. He noticed she always left the porch light on whenever he worked late. Not because she expected him, because she wanted him to know he was always coming home to someone. The small things, the things he'd once believed would always be there. One Thursday afternoon, Ben cancelled his final meeting. His assistant looked genuinely shocked. You're leaving early? I am. Should I move tomorrow's schedule? No. She frowned slightly. Everything all right? Ben smiled. Better than all right. I'm going home. His assistant laughed. I never thought I'd hear those words before 6 o'clock. Neither did I. Meanwhile, Naomi was arranging books for a weekend donation drive when Olivia walked into her office carrying 2 cups of tea. You look happier. Naomi smiled. Do I? A little. Olivia handed her a mug. Has something happened? Naomi thought for a moment. I'm not sure. Ben's been different. In what way? He listens. Olivia smiled knowingly. That sounds important. It is. Naomi wrapped both hands around the warm mug. But listening once isn't difficult. The difficult part is continuing. Educational growth follows the same principle as healthy relationships. One good day doesn't create lasting success. Consistency does. A child doesn't become confident after reading one book. An athlete doesn't become stronger after one workout. Likewise, trust isn't restored by one apology. It is restored by repeated actions that quietly prove change is real. That evening, Ben arrived home carrying 2 paper bags from a small Italian restaurant downtown. Naomi looked up from the dining table where she was sorting children's essays. What's this? Dinner? She glanced at the bags. You ordered takeout? I did. She smiled. You usually insist restaurants taste better in person. I realized something. Oh? I've spent years taking clients out for dinner. He placed the food on the counter. I couldn't remember the last time I simply brought dinner home for my wife. Naomi looked at him for several quiet seconds. You remembered my favorite? He lifted one container. Lemon herb chicken, the roasted vegetables, and... He grinned. The tiramisu you always pretend you're too full to eat. She laughed. I do not. You absolutely do. And then I finish half of yours. Her smile widened. I was wondering if you'd noticed. I have. For a brief moment, the years seemed to fall away. They sounded like the young couple who used to share one pizza because they couldn't afford 2. During dinner, they talked, not about business, not about fundraising, not about calendars. They talked about ordinary things, the neighbor's new puppy, a book Naomi had just finished, a documentary Ben had watched on architecture in Japan. At one point, Naomi laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. Ben found himself laughing with her. It struck him that joy had returned to their dining table, not because life had become easier, because they had finally made space for it. After clearing the dishes, Ben surprised Naomi again. Leave them. She looked confused. I'll wash up. You've already brought dinner. I know. You cooked every night for years. He rolled up his sleeves. I think I can survive washing a few plates. Naomi leaned against the doorway watching him. You missed one. What? The spoon. He looked around. She pointed toward the sink. There. He laughed. I still need supervision. She folded her arms. I'll allow it. As Ben rinsed the final plate, he glanced toward Naomi. Can I ask you something? She nodded. When you were teaching. Sir, were you ever afraid? Afraid of what? That you weren't making enough of a difference. Naomi smiled thoughtfully. Every teacher feels that. So how did you keep going? She dried one of the glasses before answering. I stopped measuring success by immediate results. Ben listened carefully. I planted seeds. She placed the glass in the cupboard. Some grew quickly. Some took years. Some I never saw grow at all. She looked at him. But that didn't mean they weren't growing. Ben lowered his eyes. Relationships are probably like that too. Naomi smiled. They are. You don't rebuild them in one conversation. You plant better habits. And, eventually, they become a different future. The following Saturday, the foundation hosted its annual community book festival. Families filled the streets surrounding the center. Local authors signed books. Children participated in storytelling competitions. Musicians performed on a small outdoor stage. Food trucks lined the pavement. Ben arrived carrying several large boxes. Volunteers rushed over. Mr. Whitmore? He smiled. Where do these go? One volunteer looked inside the boxes. They're books. Nearly 500 of them. Ben nodded. I thought the children might enjoy having a few more choices. Word spread quickly through the event. Parents thanked him. Teachers shook his hand. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the donation. It was that Ben stayed. Instead of leaving after a few photographs, he spent the afternoon unpacking books, carrying tables, helping children choose stories, even reading aloud during one of the afternoon sessions. Naomi watched quietly from across the festival. She had seen Ben donate millions to charities. Yet somehow, watching him sit cross-legged beneath a tree while reading to 20 excited children touched her more deeply than any oversized check ever had. One little boy tugged on Ben's jacket. Yeah? Can you read another chapter? Ben smiled. I was actually supposed to leave. The little boy's face fell. Ben looked at his watch, then back at the child. He slipped his phone into his pocket. You know what? I think the meeting can wait. The children erupted into cheers. Naomi felt tears gather in her eyes. Not because Ben had become a different man overnight, but because, for the first time in years, he had chosen people over his schedule. As the festival ended, volunteers gathered to take a group photograph. Everyone squeezed together. Children filled the front row. Teachers stood behind them. Ben naturally stepped to one side. Naomi noticed. You belong in the picture. He shook his head. This is your achievement. She smiled. No. She reached for his hand. It's ours. A photographer counted down. 3, 2, 1. The camera captured something far more valuable than smiling faces. It captured two people who had begun finding their way back to each other, not through dramatic promises, but through everyday choices. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Eleanor Hastings approached with her familiar gentle smile. I've been watching you both. Ben laughed. I hope we've behaved ourselves. Oh, you have. She looked from Ben to Naomi. But remember something. They both listened. Falling in love can happen in a moment. She paused. Remaining in love is a decision you make on ordinary days. Neither Ben nor Naomi answered immediately, because deep down, they both knew their marriage would not be saved by extraordinary moments. It would be saved, if it could be saved at all, by what they chose to do on the ordinary ones still waiting ahead. Monday morning arrived with its familiar rhythm. Traffic flowed steadily through downtown Chicago. Coffee shops buzzed with commuters. Phones rang. Meetings began. Deadlines returned. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside Ben Whitmore, something had. For the first time in years, he wasn't rushing through the day simply to reach the next achievement. He was paying attention to people, to conversations, to moments he once considered too small to matter. As he stepped into the headquarters of Whitmore Architecture, employees greeted him as usual. Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. Morning? A young receptionist looked slightly nervous as she handed him a folder. There was a printing mistake on the presentation packets. She braced herself, expecting criticism. Instead, Ben smiled. Did we catch it before the meeting? Yes. Then we solved the problem. Relief spread across her face. I'm sorry. Don't be. He handed the folder back. Everybody makes mistakes. As he walked away, the receptionist stared after him in disbelief. One of the senior assistants leaned over and whispered, Who was that? The receptionist laughed quietly. I think our boss. Upstairs, Claire was reviewing blueprints, when Ben entered the conference room. "You seem lighter," she observed. "I feel different." She smiled. "In what way?" Ben thought carefully before answering. "For years, I believed leadership meant having all the answers. And now? I think it begins with asking better questions." Claire nodded. "That's a lesson many executives never learn." The morning strategy meeting was unlike any Ben had led before. Instead of dominating the discussion, he invited everyone to contribute. When a junior designer hesitated before presenting an unconventional idea, Ben noticed immediately. "Go ahead," he encouraged. "We're listening." The young woman took a deep breath. She explained how adding more community gardens around future developments could improve neighborhood well-being while increasing property value. When she finished, the room fell silent. Finally, Ben smiled. "I like it." Several executives looked surprised. One director spoke up. "But it's different from our usual approach." Ben nodded. "Exactly." He looked around the room. "If everyone always agrees with me, then I'm not leading a team. I'm collecting echoes." The room grew quiet. Then Claire smiled. "I think that's worth writing down." Laughter spread around the table. The atmosphere felt lighter, more collaborative. Ben realized something. People contributed more when they weren't afraid of being wrong. Across the city, Naomi stood in front of nearly 100 volunteers gathered inside the Literacy Foundation. The annual autumn outreach program was only days away. Boxes of books filled every corner of the hall. Children's backpacks were stacked neatly beside them. Naomi stepped onto the small stage. "Before we begin, I want to thank every one of you." She looked around the room. "Most people believe changing a child's life requires extraordinary people." She smiled. "It doesn't. It requires ordinary people willing to do extraordinary things consistently." The volunteers listened attentively. You may never know whose future changes, because you spent one afternoon reading with them. You may never know which child becomes a teacher, or a doctor, or an engineer, because someone here believed they were worth encouraging. She paused. So never underestimate small acts of kindness. The world changes one person at a time. The room erupted into applause. After the meeting ended, a teenage volunteer approached Naomi. She looked nervous. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Naomi smiled warmly. "Yes? I've been thinking about quitting." Naomi's expression softened. "Would you like to tell me why?" The teenager looked down. "I don't think I'm making a difference." Naomi invited her to sit. "What's your name?" "Emily." "Emily." Naomi folded her hands. "Can I tell you a story?" The teenager nodded. "When I first started teaching, I had a student who barely spoke. For almost 4 months, he never answered questions. I wondered if I was failing him." Emily listened carefully. "Years later, after he'd graduated university, he sent me a letter." Naomi smiled. "He wrote, 'You were the first adult who never gave up on me.'" Emily looked up. "So you never know." Naomi nodded. "Exactly. The seeds you plant today may bloom years from now." Emily smiled for the first time that morning. "I think I'll stay." "I'm glad." Education teaches far more than reading and mathematics. It teaches patience, hope, perseverance, the same qualities healthy relationships require. Whether you're raising a child, building a career, or loving another person, growth almost always happens slowly. Those who expect instant results often give up too soon. That afternoon, Ben received an unexpected phone call. It was his younger sister, Rachel. "Ben? Hey. I was wondering if you and Naomi are coming to Dad's birthday dinner this Sunday." Ben checked his calendar instinctively. His thumb hovered over several meetings. Then he smiled to himself. "Yes. You don't even know what time." "I don't need to." Rachel laughed. "Who are you? And what have you done with my brother?" Ben laughed too. "I've been asking myself the same question." That evening, Ben arrived home carrying no briefcase, no laptop, just himself. Naomi noticed immediately. "No work?" He shook his head. "I left it at the office." She raised an eyebrow. "Voluntarily?" "I figured the company might survive one evening without me." She smiled. "I think it has a good chance." After dinner, they wandered into the living room. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Ben glanced toward one of the bookshelves. Hundreds of novels filled it from top to bottom. "You've read all of these?" "Most of them." He pulled out an old, worn novel. "I remember this one." Naomi looked up. "You do? You read it while we were dating." She smiled. "You remembered." I remember you crying at the ending. She laughed softly. I still do. Ben sat beside her on the sofa. I've got an idea. What is it? He held up the book. Read to me. Naomi blinked. You want me to read aloud? Like you do with the children. She looked at him for a long moment, then slowly opened the first page. Her voice filled the room. Gentle, calm, familiar. Ben listened, not really to the story, to her. He realized he had spent years hearing Naomi speak, without truly listening. Tonight, he listened to every word, every pause, every laugh, every change in her voice. When she finally closed the book nearly an hour later, neither of them spoke immediately. The silence felt peaceful, comfortable. Ben smiled. I forgot how much I love hearing you read. Naomi looked at him with quiet affection. You never told me before. I know. He reached for her hand. I'm trying to stop assuming you already know the things you deserve to hear. Naomi squeezed his hand gently. For years, she had longed for conversations exactly like this. Not because they solved every problem, but because they reminded her that healing doesn't always begin with dramatic moments. Sometimes, it begins with two people sitting on the same sofa, listening to the same story, and finally hearing each other again. The peaceful rhythm they had begun to rediscover lasted nearly 2 weeks. Not every day was perfect. Ben still had demanding meetings. Naomi still spent long hours at the foundation. There were evenings when one of them came home exhausted. There were mornings when conversations were brief. But something important had changed. Neither of them disappeared behind their routines anymore. If Ben knew he would be late, he called. If Naomi had an evening event, she invited him instead of assuming he was too busy. Little by little, they were learning each other again. Not as the ambitious university students they once were. Not as the glamorous couple everyone admired, but as the two people they had become after 20 years of growing, succeeding, struggling, and changing. Sunday afternoon arrived with clear skies and a cool autumn breeze. Rachel's text message reminded Ben of his father's 75th birthday dinner. Don't be late. Dad keeps asking if you're coming. Ben smiled. His father had never cared much about expensive gifts. He valued one thing above everything else. Family. As Ben finished adjusting his tie, Naomi walked into the bedroom wearing an elegant emerald green dress. He looked up. You look beautiful. She smiled. Thank you. You've said that 3 times today. He shrugged. I'm making up for lost time. Naomi laughed softly. You may be. An hour later, they arrived at Ben's childhood home in the northern suburbs of Chicago. Unlike the modern mansion they now lived in, this house felt wonderfully ordinary. The brick walls carried decades of memories. Family photographs lined the hallway. Children's drawings, carefully preserved over the years, still decorated part of the refrigerator. The smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread drifted through the house. The moment the front door opened, Rachel greeted them with a wide smile. There you are. She hugged Naomi first, then her brother. I was beginning to think your company had scheduled another emergency meeting. Ben grinned. So was I. Rachel laughed. I like this new version of you. So do I. Inside, Ben's father, Harold Whitmore, was sitting comfortably in his favorite armchair, surrounded by grandchildren. Though his hair had turned completely silver, his eyes remained sharp and kind. The moment he saw Ben and Naomi, his face brightened. You made it. Ben bent down to hug his father. Happy birthday, Dad. Harold smiled warmly. The best gift is having everyone together. He looked at Naomi. And my favorite daughter-in-law. Naomi laughed. I'm your only daughter-in-law. Exactly. He winked. That makes the competition easy. The room erupted with laughter. Dinner was loud, warm, comfortably chaotic. Children interrupted conversations. Someone accidentally knocked over a glass of lemonade. Rachel's husband insisted on telling the same fishing story everyone had heard at least 5 times. Nobody minded. Ben found himself smiling more than speaking. He watched his nieces helping their grandfather cut his birthday cake. He watched Naomi laughing with Rachel in the kitchen. He watched his father patiently listening to every grandchild's story as though each one were the most important person in the room. It struck him that his father had built something remarkable. Not a company. A family. After dinner, Harold quietly stepped onto the back porch with a cup of tea. Ben followed him. The evening air carried the scent of fallen leaves. For several minutes they simply stood side by side. Finally, Harold spoke. You've been happier lately. Ben looked surprised. Have the first? His father smiled. A father notices. Ben rested his hands on the porch railing. I've been thinking a lot. About work? No. He looked toward the dining room window, where Naomi was helping clear the table. About my marriage. Harold nodded slowly. I wondered when we'd have this conversation. Ben turned. You knew? His father chuckled. Son, I've been married to your mother for 48 years. You think I can't recognize emotional distance when I see it? Ben lowered his head. I thought I was doing everything for Naomi. I'm sure you believed that. I did. Harold took a sip of tea. But tell me something. When your mother was alive, do you know what she loved most? Ben smiled faintly. Your Sunday breakfasts. No. Harold shook his head. Those pancakes were terrible. Ben laughed. They were. You know why she loved them? He shrugged. Because, every Sunday morning, I belonged completely to her. Ben's smile slowly faded. Harold continued. No phone. No business. No distractions. Just us. He looked directly at his son. Women rarely remember every gift. They remember how you made them feel. Those words settled heavily inside Ben. One of life's greatest misunderstandings is believing that love is measured by sacrifice alone. Sacrifice matters. Hard work matters. Providing matters. But relationships also need availability. The people we love don't only need what our hands can build. They need what our presence can give. Later that evening, as everyone prepared to leave, Harold called Naomi over. I've been wanting to tell you something. She sat beside him. Yes? I've watched you love my son for over 20 years. Naomi smiled gently. I've tried. You've done more than try. Harold reached into the pocket of his cardigan and removed an old photograph. I found this last week. Naomi took it carefully. It showed 2 university students sitting on the hood of an old car. Ben held a slice of pizza in one hand. Naomi was laughing so hard she had closed her eyes. The picture was slightly faded around the edges. I remember this. So do I, Harold said. You came to visit us that weekend. Naomi nodded. We were completely broke. Harold smiled. You know what your mother whispered to me after you both left? Naomi shook her head. She said, those 2 don't have much money, but they look richer than anyone I know. Naomi stared quietly at the photograph. Harold continued, don't spend so much time mourning what you've lost. That, you forget what you still have. Naomi looked toward Ben, who was helping one of his nephews into a jacket. She smiled softly. I'll remember that. On the drive home, neither of them turned on the radio. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt companionable. After several miles, Ben spoke. My dad said something tonight. Naomi looked at him. He told me Mum loved Sunday mornings. She smiled. I remember. I asked him why. Ben paused. He said it wasn't because of breakfast. It was because every Sunday. He gave her his full attention. Naomi rested her head lightly against the seat. Your father has always been a wise man. Ben nodded. I've spent years giving everyone else my attention first. He glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. I'm sorry. Naomi was quiet for several moments. Finally she spoke. I appreciate hearing that. He waited. But apologies aren't destinations, Ben. They're starting points. He nodded slowly. I know. And I don't expect perfection. She looked out at the lights passing beyond the window. I just need consistency. Ben smiled softly. You'll have it. Neither of them realized that someone else had been thinking about that very same word. Earlier that afternoon, while organizing files in her office, Claire had discovered something tucked inside an old company archive. A sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Across the front, written in Ben's unmistakable handwriting from more than 20 years earlier, were 6 simple words. For Naomi, open when we make it. Claire had no idea what was inside. She also had no idea that the forgotten envelope was about to uncover a promise Ben had made long before he became a billionaire. A promise he himself no longer remembered making. Monday morning began like every other. The elevators hummed. Employees hurried through the marble lobby carrying coffee cups and laptops. The giant digital display in the reception area welcomed visitors to Whitmore Architecture with the company's familiar slogan, Building Tomorrow, Today. Ben glanced at it as he walked inside. For years, those 3 words had filled him with pride. Today, they made him wonder something. Had he spent so much time building tomorrow that he'd forgotten to live today? He shook the thought away as his assistant caught up with him. Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. Morning, Hannah. You've got the executive budget review at 9, a call with the London partners at 11, and the design committee at 1. She hesitated before adding, oh, and Claire asked if she could see you when you have a moment. Ben nodded. Tell her I'll stop by after the budget meeting. The meeting lasted almost 2 hours. Charts, forecasts, construction schedules, investment opportunities, everything unfolded exactly as expected. But something about Ben had changed. Instead of rushing everyone toward decisions, he listened. He asked questions. He invited younger executives to challenge ideas. Several board members exchanged surprised glances. Afterwards, one senior architect caught Claire in the corridor. "I don't know what happened to him." Claire smiled knowingly. "But I hope it lasts." When the hallway finally emptied, Claire knocked gently on Ben's office door. "You wanted to see me?" "No," she smiled. "I wanted you to see something." She carried a worn brown envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. Its corners were slightly bent. It looked as though it had been forgotten inside a drawer for decades. "I found this while organizing some archive boxes." Ben frowned. "What is it?" "I think it belongs to you." She placed it on his desk. The moment Ben saw the handwriting, his expression changed. He recognized it immediately. His own, 23 years younger. Across the front were 6 carefully written words. "For Naomi, open when we make it." Ben slowly sat down. His heart began beating faster. "I haven't seen this in years." Claire studied his face. "I thought it might be important." He nodded, almost absent-mindedly. "It is." She quietly left the office, gently closing the door behind her. Ben remained completely still. His fingers rested lightly on the envelope. He honestly couldn't remember what was inside. Memories have a curious way of returning, not all at once, but in fragments. A rainy afternoon, a tiny apartment, the smell of instant coffee, Naomi laughing while sitting cross-legged on the floor, a second-hand desk bought from a charity shop. Hope, so much hope. He remembered writing something, folding it carefully, sealing it inside the envelope, then telling Naomi, "We'll open it when we've made it." She had smiled. "Promise?" "I promise." Neither of them had ever mentioned it again. With surprising care, Ben broke the aging seal. Inside lay several folded sheets of notebook paper. There was also something else, a faded photograph. It showed Ben and Naomi standing beside their very first office. It wasn't much. A small rented room above an old hardware store. The paint was peeling. The sign outside was crooked, yet both of them were smiling, as though they already owned the world. Ben turned the photograph over. Naomi had written on the back, "The beginning will always matter." His throat tightened. He unfolded the letter. The first line alone stole his breath. "Dear future Ben." He smiled sadly. He had completely forgotten that he had written to himself. He continued reading. "If you're opening this, it means we finally did it. Maybe we're successful. Maybe we've built the company we keep dreaming about. Maybe people finally know our names." Ben's eyes moved more slowly now. "If that's true, I want to remind you of something. None of this started because you were the smartest man in the room. It started because one extraordinary woman believed in you when almost nobody else did." He stopped reading. His vision blurred. He blinked several times before continuing. "If success ever makes you too busy to sit across the table from Naomi, you've misunderstood why you're working so hard." He lowered the paper. Silence filled the office. Outside, telephones rang. Printers hummed. Employees hurried through corridors. Inside, time had stopped. He forced himself to continue. "Promise me something. Never let her wonder whether she's more important than another meeting. Never make her compete with your calendar. Never become so successful that the woman who believed in your dreams starts feeling like a visitor inside your life." Ben closed his eyes. Every sentence felt as though it had been written yesterday. Yet somehow, the younger version of himself understood something the older version had forgotten. The final paragraph was written in larger letters, almost as though his younger self had wanted to make absolutely certain he wouldn't miss it. "One day, you'll build skyscrapers. One day, you'll have money. One day, people will admire you. But if Naomi ever feels lonely while sleeping beside you, you haven't really made it." Ben slowly folded the letter, then unfolded it again. He read those final lines 3 more times. Each time they hurt a little more, not because they were cruel, because they were true. One of the greatest dangers of success is that it quietly changes your definition of achievement. At first, achievement means reaching your goal. Later, it becomes reaching the next goal, then the next, and the next, until one day, you realize you've been climbing a ladder so quickly that you never stopped to ask whether it was still leaning against the right wall. Real success isn't measured only by what you accomplish. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Hannah stepped inside. "Mr. Whitmore?" He quickly folded the letter. "Yes?" "The mayor's office is on line 1. Ben looked at the blinking phone. Normally he would have answered immediately. Instead, he looked back at the envelope. "Tell them I'll call back in 30 minutes. She blinked. "They said it's important." Ben smiled quietly. "So is this?" She nodded. "Of course." As she left, Ben carefully placed the letter inside his desk drawer. Not to hide it, but to protect it. He had spent years protecting contracts, investments, and business plans. Perhaps it was time to start protecting the promises that had built his life in the first place. Across town, Naomi was organizing donations when her phone vibrated. It was Rachel. "Hi, Naomi." Rachel sounded unusually emotional. "I found something while helping Dad sort through Mum's old things." "What is it?" "A photo album." Naomi smiled. "Your mother loved taking pictures." "She did." Rachel paused. "There are dozens of photographs of you and Ben from university." Naomi laughed softly. "Oh no." "Oh yes. The hairstyles alone deserve their own museum." Both women laughed. Then Rachel's voice became gentler. "There's also something tucked inside the last page." "What?" "A handwritten note from Mum." Naomi's smile slowly faded. "What does it say?" "I haven't read all of it." Rachel hesitated. "I think it's meant for both of you." Naomi looked out through her office window toward the playground where children were reading beneath the autumn sun. For reasons she couldn't explain, her heart began beating a little faster. Neither she nor Ben realized it yet, but within the same hour, 2 forgotten messages from the past had quietly found their way back into their lives. And sometimes, the people we used to be remember exactly what the people we've become most need to hear. Naomi could hardly concentrate for the rest of the afternoon. She tried reviewing grant applications. She answered emails. She even joined a planning meeting for the Foundation's winter reading campaign. But Rachel's words kept replaying in her mind. "I think it's meant for both of you." Harold's birthday dinner had already stirred old memories. Now another piece of the past had unexpectedly resurfaced. It felt as though life itself was quietly inviting her to look backward before she could move forward. Just before 5 o'clock, Olivia knocked gently on her office door. "Ready to call it a day?" Naomi smiled. "I think so." Olivia noticed the thoughtful expression on her face. "Everything all right?" Naomi nodded. "Rachel found something that belonged to Ben's mother." "Oh? A note?" Olivia tilted her head. "Are you nervous about reading it?" Naomi thought for a moment. "A little." "Why?" "Because sometimes the people who know us best see truths we're not ready to admit." Olivia smiled gently. "My grandmother used to say something similar." "What was it?" "The people who love you don't always tell you what you want to hear. They tell you what they hope will help you grow." Naomi smiled. "I think your grandmother and Eleanor would have been good friends." When Naomi arrived at Rachel's house later that evening, the front door was already open. The familiar smell of cinnamon and freshly baked bread drifted through the hallway. Rachel hugged her warmly. "I'm glad you came." "So am I." They settled into the cozy living room where a large photo album rested on the coffee table. Rachel carefully opened it. The first pages were filled with childhood photographs of Ben, Little League baseball games, school concerts, family camping trips. Naomi smiled as she turned each page. "I've never seen these before." "Mum kept everything." Rachel laughed. "She even kept one of Ben's report cards because his teacher wrote." She pointed to the comment. "Benjamin talks too much, but asks wonderful questions." Naomi laughed. "I wish I'd met that version of him." Rachel smiled knowingly. "I think he's still in there." As they continued turning the pages, the photographs gradually changed. University graduation, Ben and Naomi's engagement, their small wedding, the opening of Ben's first office, their first tiny apartment with mismatched furniture. Naomi stopped at one picture. She and Ben were sitting on the kitchen floor eating takeaway from paper containers. There wasn't a dining table yet, or proper chairs. They looked completely exhausted, yet neither of them had stopped smiling. Rachel watched Naomi quietly. "What are you thinking?" Naomi traced the edge of the photograph with her fingertip. "We kept waiting for life to become easier." Rachel nodded. "And did it?" "In some ways." Naomi smiled sadly. "But somewhere along the journey, we forgot that happiness had already been sitting on the kitchen floor with us." Rachel reached toward the final page of the album. Carefully tucked into a small envelope was a folded sheet of cream-colored stationery. "My mum labeled it." Naomi looked closer. Written across the front in elegant handwriting were the words, "For Ben and Naomi, when life gets too busy." Naomi felt a lump form in her throat. Rachel handed her the note. "I thought the two of you should read it together." Naomi looked uncertain. "I don't know when that'll be." Rachel smiled gently. "Then maybe that's exactly when you should." Across the city, Ben was still sitting in his office. The letter from his younger self lay open on his desk once again. He had read it 5 times. Each reading uncovered something he had overlooked before. His eyes rested on one sentence. Never make her compete with your calendar. He quietly opened the calendar application on his computer. The coming month appeared. Every single weekday was filled. Meetings, flights, conferences, investor lunches, strategy sessions. Not one evening had been intentionally reserved for Naomi. Not one. He leaned back in his chair. For years he had believed calendars simply reflected priorities. Now he realized they also revealed them. Education isn't only about learning new ideas. Sometimes it's about recognizing old mistakes. Growth begins the moment we become willing to question the habits we've accepted as normal. The strongest people are not those who never change. They are the ones humble enough to admit they need to. Without allowing himself time to overthink it, Ben began deleting appointments. One dinner meeting, gone. A networking reception, cancelled. A weekend conference, delegated to another executive. His assistant, Hannah, appeared moments later after receiving several automatic cancellation notices. She knocked cautiously. "Everything all right?" Ben smiled. "Better than all right." She looked confused. "You've cancelled nearly half your evening schedule." "I know. Should I reschedule them?" He thought for a moment. "No. What should I tell them?" Ben closed his laptop. "Tell them I've made another commitment." She waited. "What kind of commitment?" He smiled quietly. "The one I should have protected years ago." Hannah didn't ask another question. She simply nodded. "Understood." Later that night, Ben arrived home to find the lights still on. Naomi was sitting on the back patio overlooking the lake. A blanket rested across her lap. The unopened note from Ben's mother sat beside her on the small wooden table. She looked up as he approached. "You're home early?" "I wanted to be." He noticed the envelope. "What's that?" "Rachel found it today." He sat beside her. "It's from your mum." Ben looked surprised. "My mum?" Naomi nodded. "Rachel thinks we should read it together." For a long moment, neither of them reached for it. There was something almost sacred about the silence between them. Finally, Ben smiled softly. "Can I show you something first?" He reached into his briefcase and carefully removed the old envelope Claire had found. Naomi's eyes widened immediately. "You still have that?" "I forgot it even existed." She looked at the familiar handwriting. "For Naomi. Open when we make it." A slow smile spread across her face. "I remember this." "You do?" "You made me promise not to open it." Ben handed her the folded letter. "I finally did today." She looked at him. "Was it what you expected?" He shook his head. "It was what I needed." Naomi unfolded the pages and began reading. As her eyes moved from line to line, tears quietly gathered. Not tears of sadness. Not entirely. They were the tears that come when you're reminded of a version of someone you thought had disappeared. She reached the final paragraph and covered her mouth with one hand. Ben watched her carefully. "I'm sorry." She looked up. "For what?" "For forgetting the man who wrote that letter." Naomi gently folded the pages. "No." Her voice was soft but certain. "You didn't forget him." She placed the letter against her heart. "You just got lost for a while." The evening breeze stirred the trees around them. Neither of them spoke again for several minutes. The unopened note from Ben's mother still rested between them. 2 messages from the past. One already read. One still waiting. Neither realized that the second letter would reveal a truth neither of them had ever expected. A truth that Helen Whitmore had quietly recognized long before either Ben or Naomi did. The lake was unusually still. Even the gentle waves seemed reluctant to disturb the silence that settled over the patio. Ben and Naomi sat side by side beneath the soft glow of the outdoor lanterns. Between them rested 2 letters. One had reminded them of the dreams they once shared. The other still held words from someone who had loved them both deeply. Naomi rested her fingertips on the cream-colored envelope. "I still can't believe your mother wrote this." Ben smiled softly. "My mum had a habit of seeing things long before anyone else." Naomi nodded. "I remember. She always knew when one of us was pretending everything was fine." Ben chuckled quietly. "She'd ask one question. And somehow, you'd end up telling her everything." Naomi laughed. She had that gift. For a moment, both of them simply smiled at the memory of Helen Whitmore. Her kindness had never demanded attention. It simply made people feel safe. Ben carefully opened the envelope. The paper inside had yellowed with time, but Helen's elegant handwriting remained as beautiful as ever. He cleared his throat before reading aloud. "My dear Ben and Naomi, if you're reading this together, then life has probably become very busy. Perhaps you're building careers. Perhaps you're raising dreams that once seemed impossible. Whatever season you're in, I hope you've remembered something your father and I learned the hard way. Ben paused. Naomi quietly reached for his hand. He squeezed it gently before continuing. Never allow success to become so loud that you can no longer hear each other's hearts. Neither of them spoke. The sentence lingered in the night air. Ben continued. People often believe marriages end because love disappears. In my experience, love rarely disappears first. Attention does. Naomi lowered her eyes. Helen's words felt less like a letter and more like a conversation. Ben read on. Keep asking each other simple questions. How are you? What are you afraid of? What made you smile today? What burden can I help you carry? Those little conversations become the bridge that carries a marriage through difficult seasons. Ben stopped again. His voice had grown quieter. I don't remember the last time I asked you any of those questions. Naomi looked at him gently. I don't remember the last time I answered them honestly. He looked surprised. You didn't? She shook her head. I stopped because I convinced myself you didn't have room for the answers. Ben felt a knot tighten in his chest. I wish I'd known. Naomi smiled sadly. I wish I'd told you. One of the greatest myths about communication is that people automatically know how we feel. They don't. Love is not the ability to read minds. It is the willingness to ask and the courage to answer honestly. Many relationships suffer not because two people stop caring, but because both quietly assume the other already knows what remains unsaid. Ben continued reading. Ben, never become too proud to apologize. And, Naomi, never become so afraid of conflict that you stop speaking your truth. Naomi laughed softly through misty eyes. That sounds exactly like her. It does. Ben smiled. She always managed to correct people without making them feel condemned. Naomi nodded. She believed growth was more important than being right. Ben looked down at the letter again. The final paragraph waited. He took a slow breath. One day, you'll look at each other and wonder where the years went. When that day comes, I hope you discover that you've spent more time collecting memories than collecting achievements. Because titles fade, money changes, buildings grow old, but the way you make each other feel, that becomes the story your hearts remember. Choose each other, again and again. With all my love, Helen Whitmore. Silence followed. Not an awkward silence, a sacred one. Naomi gently folded the letter and placed it back inside its envelope. I miss her. So do I. Ben looked out across the lake. I think she understood us better than we understood ourselves. Naomi smiled. I think she understood marriage. Several minutes passed before Ben finally spoke again. Can I ask you those questions now? Naomi turned toward him. The ones my mum wrote. She nodded. I'd like that. Ben drew a slow breath. How are you? Naomi didn't answer immediately. She thought carefully. I'm hopeful. He smiled. That makes me happy. She continued. But I'm also cautious. I don't want us to confuse progress with completion. Ben nodded. I understand. This is still new. It is. He asked the second question. What are you afraid of? Naomi looked toward the water. I'm afraid we'll slowly drift back into old habits. She met his eyes. Not because you don't love me, but because habits are comfortable. Ben listened without interrupting. I don't want us to become strangers again while living in the same house. Her honesty hurt, but it also felt like a gift, because for the first time in years, she wasn't protecting him from her feelings. She was trusting him with them. He asked another question. What made you smile today? Naomi's expression brightened. A little girl at the foundation. What happened? She finished her first chapter book. Ben smiled. And? She hugged it before she hugged me. They both laughed. I think that's a compliment to the author. I think so too. Then Naomi looked at him. My turn. Ben nodded. What burden are you carrying that you've never told me about? The question caught him completely off guard. He stared into the darkness for a long moment. Finally, he answered, I'm tired. Naomi's face softened. Not physically. He shook his head. I'm tired of believing I have to earn my worth every single day. She listened quietly. I spent so many years trying to prove I deserved everything we built. That, I forgot I was already enough for the people who loved me. Naomi reached over and gently placed her hand against his cheek. You never had to earn my love, Ben. His eyes filled with tears he no longer tried to hide. For the first time in decades, Benjamin Whitmore allowed himself to cry in front of the woman who had stood beside him from the very beginning. And Naomi didn't try to stop his tears. She simply stayed beside him. Sometimes, The greatest act of love isn't finding the perfect words. It's making sure the person you love never has to carry their heart alone. What a powerful reminder that sometimes the most important conversations are the ones we've been avoiding for years. Now I'd love to hear from you. If you were in Ben's position, what would have affected you the most? The letter from his younger self, Helen's heartfelt advice, or Naomi's gratitude jar? And if you were Naomi, after everything she had quietly endured, would you find it easy to trust that Ben had truly changed, or would you still need more time before opening your heart completely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story, your perspective, or even a simple sentence could encourage someone else who is going through a difficult season in their own relationship. If this chapter touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring story filled with love, hope, forgiveness, and meaningful life lessons. And if this message reminded you of someone you care about, a spouse, a parent, a friend, or anyone who's been too busy to say what truly matters, share this story with them. Sometimes one conversation can change the direction of a relationship forever. Stay with us, because what's coming next is the most honest chapter yet. Ben and Naomi are about to confront the hidden wounds they've carried for years, and together they'll discover that healing doesn't begin when someone changes. It begins when both people have the courage to tell the truth. The first frost of the season arrived quietly. By sunrise, a thin layer of white shimmered across the Whitmore's garden. Naomi stood by the kitchen window, cradling a warm mug of coffee, as she watched a pair of robins hop across the lawn. There was something comforting about the changing seasons. Autumn never tried to hold on to summer. Winter never apologized for arriving. Nature accepted change without resistance. She wondered why people found it so much harder. Behind her, she heard familiar footsteps. Ben walked into the kitchen wearing a navy sweater instead of his usual business suit. She glanced at the clock. "You're still here?" He smiled. "I took the morning off." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Everything all right?" "I wanted breakfast with my wife." A smile touched her lips. "You didn't have to take time off for that." "I know." He poured himself a cup of coffee. "I wanted to." They cooked together. Well, Naomi cooked. Ben attempted to help. He reached for the eggs and promptly dropped one onto the kitchen floor. Naomi burst into laughter. "I was aiming for the bowl." "I'm sure you were." He looked at the broken shell. "I've built skyscrapers. And yet, I've been defeated by breakfast." She handed him a cloth. "Every expert starts as a beginner." He smiled. "Is that another one of your teacher sayings?" "It is. And today," she pointed toward the floor, "you're my student." They laughed together as they cleaned up the mess. Sometimes, healing doesn't happen during emotional speeches. Sometimes it happens while two people laugh over a broken egg on a kitchen floor. The ordinary moments matter because they quietly remind us that joy doesn't always arrive dressed in extraordinary circumstances. Often, it is hiding inside everyday life, waiting for us to slow down long enough to notice it. After breakfast, Ben carried 2 plates to the sink. As he turned on the tap, he spoke without looking up. "Can I tell you something I've never admitted to anyone?" Naomi dried her hands and leaned against the counter. "You can tell me anything." He took a long breath. "When I was 10, I came second in a regional science competition." Naomi waited patiently. "I remember coming home. I thought I'd done really well." "You had." He nodded. "My dad hugged me. But afterwards, one of our relatives smiled and said." He looked down at the running water. "Second place just means somebody else worked harder." The words lingered between them. Naomi's expression softened. "You were only 10. "I know." Ben turned off the tap. "I don't think anyone meant to hurt me. But something changed that day." He rested both hands on the edge of the sink. "I started believing that being good wasn't enough. I had to be the best. Every time." Naomi remained silent, not because she had nothing to say, because she wanted him to continue. "I carried that belief into university, into business, into every project." He gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "I didn't realize I'd also carried it into our marriage." Naomi looked at him carefully. "What do you mean?" "I kept thinking, if I achieved one more thing, you'd have an even better life." He smiled sadly. "I never realized. You were already asking for something achievement couldn't give you." One of the greatest lessons parents, teachers, and mentors can pass on is this: children should be encouraged to pursue excellence, but they should never believe their worth depends on their performance. When people grow up thinking they must constantly earn love, approval, or acceptance, they often become adults who struggle to rest, to be vulnerable, or to believe they are enough simply as they are. True confidence isn't built through constant achievement. It's built through unconditional acceptance. Naomi walked over until she was standing beside him. Can I tell you something I've never admitted either? He nodded. When your company started growing, I noticed how much pressure you were under. She folded her arms loosely. I watched you worry about paying salaries. I saw you working through the night. I heard you talking about investors pulling out. She smiled gently. I didn't want to become another problem you had to solve. Ben looked at her. So I stopped asking for things. She continued quietly. If I felt lonely, I told myself to be patient. If I missed you, I told myself your work was important. If I felt hurt, I convinced myself it would pass. She looked out through the window. I thought I was protecting you. Her voice grew softer. But eventually, I stopped telling you what I needed. Ben closed his eyes, and I stopped asking. They stood together in silence, neither trying to defend themselves, neither trying to prove they had suffered more. For the first time, they were looking at the same problem instead of looking at each other as the problem. Relationships often fall into unhealthy patterns without either person intending them. One person avoids difficult conversations to keep the peace. The other assumes silence means everything is fine. Over time, both become trapped inside a misunderstanding neither created alone. Healthy relationships begin to heal when couples stop asking, whose fault is this? And start asking, what pattern are we creating together? Blame divides. Understanding rebuilds. Later that afternoon, Ben received a call from his sister. Hey. Hi. Rachel sounded cheerful. Dad wants to know if you're free on Saturday. For what? He wants your help cleaning out Mum's old workshop. Ben smiled. I'd like that. Good. She paused. He also said there are a few boxes with your name on them. My name? Apparently, Mum labeled them years ago. Ben laughed softly. I'm beginning to think she planned conversations she'd never get to have. Rachel's voice became thoughtful. Maybe. Or maybe she trusted you'd be ready for them when the time came. After they hung up, Ben found himself smiling. For years, he'd measured his future by quarterly reports and business forecasts. Now, the things he looked forward to were far simpler. Breakfast with Naomi, helping his father, reading old letters. It amazed him how quickly life's priorities could change once the heart began paying attention. That evening, Naomi arrived home carrying a small paper bag. Ben looked up from the sofa. What's that? She grinned. A surprise. She placed the bag on the coffee table and pulled out a colorful cardboard box. He read the label aloud. Memory questions for couples. He laughed. You bought a game? It's not really a game. What is it? She opened the box. It asks questions. So we can learn things about each other again. Ben smiled. I like that. Naomi shuffled the cards before handing him the first one. Your turn. He read aloud. What is one dream you quietly gave up without telling anyone? The smile slowly faded from his face. He looked at the card for a long moment. Finally, he answered. I always wanted to design affordable neighborhoods. Naomi looked surprised. You did? He nodded. Communities where teachers, nurses, firefighters and young families could actually afford beautiful homes. What happened? I got distracted. By success? He smiled sadly. By projects that made more money. Naomi reached for another card. My turn. She read silently before looking up. When did you feel most loved in your relationship? Her answer came immediately. Our first apartment. Ben looked puzzled. Really? We had almost nothing. I know, she smiled. But every evening, you'd ask me about my day before telling me about yours. Ben felt his chest tighten. She wasn't remembering luxury. She wasn't remembering holidays. She wasn't remembering expensive gifts. She was remembering being heard. As the little box of question cards sat between them on the coffee table, Ben realized something profound. Perhaps rediscovering each other didn't require complicated solutions. Perhaps it simply required asking the questions they should never have stopped asking in the first place. The question cards remained on the coffee table long after the conversation ended. Neither Ben nor Naomi felt any urgency to put them away. For years they had spent evenings in separate corners of the house. Ben answering emails in his office, Naomi reading alone in the living room. Now, the quiet no longer separated them. It invited them closer. Ben reached for another card. I think we're supposed to take turns. Naomi smiled. I think you're right. He drew a card and read it aloud. What is one thing your partner does that always makes you feel safe? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Naomi. You never panic. She tilted her head. I do on the inside. He laughed softly. You hide it well. He leaned back into the sofa. When the company almost went bankrupt during our 3rd year, I remember walking through the front door convinced everything we'd built was about to disappear. Naomi remembered that night vividly. You didn't say a word. I couldn't. Ben nodded. I thought if I admitted how scared I was, you'd lose confidence in me. Naomi smiled gently. So, what happened? You handed me a bowl of soup. He laughed at the memory. And? You sat beside me for almost an hour. You didn't ask about business. You didn't pressure me to talk. You simply stayed. He looked into her eyes. I realized something that night. What? I wasn't carrying everything alone. Naomi's eyes glistened. I wish you'd remembered that. Emotional safety is one of the greatest gifts we can offer another person. It isn't created by having all the answers. It isn't created by solving every problem. It is created when someone knows they can bring you their fears, disappointments, and uncertainties without being judged. People flourish where they feel emotionally safe. Children, friends, employees, spouses, everyone. Naomi reached for the next card. She smiled as she read it silently. This one's interesting. What does it say? She looked at him. If you could relive one ordinary day with your partner, which day would you choose? Ben answered before she had finished lowering the card. The day we got caught in that rainstorm. Naomi burst into laughter. The bus never came. We walked almost 3 miles. We were soaked. He laughed too. And your shoes fell apart. They were already falling apart. She corrected him. They simply chose that day to give up. Ben shook his head, smiling. I've attended state dinners. I've met presidents. I've stood on stages accepting awards. He paused. But if someone asked me which day I'd relive, I'd choose walking through Chicago in the rain with you. Naomi's smile slowly softened. You know why I loved that day? Why? Because you never once complained. You just kept making me laugh. She looked out the window. We had no umbrella, no money for a taxi, no idea what the future looked like. She turned back to him. But I never felt uncertain. Ben frowned slightly. You didn't? She shook her head. No, because I trusted the person walking beside me. Those words stayed with him. She hadn't said she trusted the size of his bank account, or his career, or his ambition. She trusted him. Somewhere along the journey, he had spent years trying to become more impressive, when all she had ever wanted was for him to remain dependable. The next morning, Ben arrived at the office carrying a notebook instead of his tablet. Claire noticed immediately. Going old school? He smiled. I've started writing things down. Business ideas? He shook his head. Personal ones. She looked intrigued. What kind? Ben opened the notebook. The first page contained a handwritten heading. Things I never want to forget again. Beneath it were several short sentences. Ask Naomi about her day before talking about mine. Leave work at work, whenever possible. Celebrate small moments. Listen without planning my response. Protect family time the same way I protect board meetings. Claire smiled as she read the list. I like these. They're simple. Ben nodded. I've spent years chasing complicated solutions. He closed the notebook. It turns out the important things are usually simple. Education works much the same way. The greatest lessons are rarely the most complicated. Treat people with kindness. Keep your promises. Be curious. Tell the truth. Listen carefully. Express gratitude. These principles are simple enough for a child to understand. Yet many adults spend a lifetime trying to practice them consistently. Wisdom isn't knowing more. It's faithfully applying what already matters. Around lunchtime, Ben received an invitation to speak at a prestigious international business summit. His assistant entered with the printed details. They'd like you to give the opening keynote. Ben skimmed the document. The event would last 4 days. The dates caught his attention. It overlapped with the annual reading retreat Naomi organized for children and their families. He remembered because she had spoken about it several times over the past month. Hannah waited patiently. This is a tremendous opportunity. I know. They'll need an answer by tomorrow. Ben nodded thoughtfully. I'll think about it. That evening, Naomi was arranging books for the retreat when Olivia noticed her smiling. Good news? Naomi looked up. I think, maybe. What happened? I don't know if anything happened. She laughed softly. That's the strange part. Olivia looked confused. What do you mean? I don't feel like I'm waiting anymore. Waiting? For Ben to notice me. She carefully stacked another pile of books. He's already here. Olivia smiled warmly. That sounds peaceful. It is. Naomi paused. I've realized something. What's that? I spent years believing happiness would return once everything changed. She looked around the room filled with books, volunteers, and children's artwork. But healing began the moment we both became willing to change together. That night, Ben found Naomi sitting on the back porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. He carried 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She looked up and smiled. You remembered? I remembered. He handed her one of the mugs before sitting beside her. I've been offered something. Naomi looked at him. A new project? A speaking engagement? She nodded. You've always enjoyed those. I used to. The answer surprised even him. She waited. It overlaps with your reading retreat. Naomi immediately smiled. You should go. He looked at her. You think so? It's a wonderful opportunity. It is. She took a sip of her hot chocolate. I don't want you turning down opportunities because of guilt. Ben was quiet for a moment. That's not why I'd turn it down. Then why? He looked out across the dark water. Because, when I picture where I want to be that weekend. I don't picture a stage. He smiled. I picture sitting beside a group of children while my wife reads them a story. Naomi's eyes filled with quiet emotion. She didn't answer straight away. Instead, she rested her head gently against his shoulder. For years, Ben had believed success meant always choosing the biggest opportunity. Now he was beginning to understand that the richest moments in life are often the ones no audience ever sees. And somehow, that felt like the greatest success of all. The decision stayed with Ben long after they went inside. He lay awake that night staring at the ceiling. The invitation to the international summit rested on his bedside table. A few years earlier, there would have been nothing to consider. He would have accepted immediately. He would have thanked the organizers, prepared his keynote, booked the flights, then informed Naomi of his schedule as though it were simply another fact of life. Now, he kept asking himself a different question. What kind of man do I want to become? Not the kind of billionaire. Not the kind of executive. The kind of husband. The following morning, Ben arrived at the office carrying the invitation. Instead of signing it, he placed it inside his desk drawer. His assistant appeared a few minutes later. Good morning. Morning, Hannah. The summit organizers called again. I expected they might. They're hoping for an answer today. Ben nodded. I'll give them one before lunch. She smiled. They'll be delighted. Ben smiled politely. We'll see. Meanwhile, Naomi was preparing for the Foundation's annual reading retreat. Unlike the large public festivals, this event focused on families. Parents and children would spend an entire weekend reading together, attending workshops, and learning simple ways to build stronger relationships through storytelling. Volunteers moved around the hall carrying boxes filled with books, art supplies, blankets, and board games. Olivia walked over carrying a clipboard. We've reached 243 registrations. Naomi's eyes widened. Already? And more are still coming in. Naomi smiled. That's wonderful. Olivia looked around the busy room. You've created something special. Naomi shook her head. No, we've created something special. She looked at the volunteers. Communities aren't built by one person. They're built by ordinary people deciding to care together. Education doesn't begin when a child opens a textbook. It begins when someone creates an environment where learning feels safe, joyful, and meaningful. Children who associate learning with encouragement often carry curiosity into adulthood. The same principle applies to relationships. People grow where they feel encouraged, not criticized. Encouragement doesn't remove challenges. It gives people confidence to face them. Back at Whitmore Architecture, Ben entered the executive conference room. The board meeting was already underway. Jonathan Pierce, the chairman, looked up. Perfect timing. Ben took his seat. Jonathan smiled. We've all seen the invitation. Several board members nodded. It's an incredible honor. We're proud of you. Ben thanked them quietly. Jonathan continued. I assume you'll be accepting. For a brief moment, the room became completely still. Ben folded his hands on the table. I'm honored by the invitation. A few people smiled, but the smiles faded. I won't be attending. Silence. One director blinked. I'm sorry. Did you say you were declining? I did. Jonathan looked genuinely surprised. May I ask, why? Ben smiled calmly. I already have somewhere more important to be. Nobody spoke. Finally, Jonathan asked, where? Ben answered without hesitation. A children's reading retreat. Several executives exchanged confused glances. One of them chuckled softly, assuming Ben was joking. He wasn't. Jonathan studied him carefully. That's quite an unusual choice. It probably is. Ben nodded. But I've spent 20 years choosing work first. He looked around the room. I've learned something recently. What? My company benefits from a healthy leader. He smiled. And my family deserves a present husband. The room remained quiet. Not because anyone disagreed. Because no one expected those words from Benjamin Whitmore. Jonathan eventually smiled. I think your priorities are changing. They are. Jonathan extended his hand across the table. Then I hope you enjoy every minute of that retreat. Ben shook his hand. I intend to. As the meeting ended, Claire caught up with him near the lift. I heard. He smiled. News travels quickly. It does around here. She folded her arms. Any regrets? He thought for a moment. Only one. What? I wish I'd realized years ago that saying no to one opportunity sometimes means saying yes to a better life. Claire nodded thoughtfully. I've worked with executives for 15 years. And? Many retire with extraordinary careers. She smiled sadly. Some of them don't know their own children very well. Ben lowered his eyes. I don't want that story. I don't think you do either. That evening, Naomi arrived home balancing several shopping bags filled with books and craft materials. As she stepped through the front door, she found Ben in the dining room surrounded by colored paper, markers, and stacks of children's novels. She stopped in surprise. What are you doing? Ben looked up with a grin. I volunteered. You? What? I called Olivia. Naomi laughed. You called Olivia? I asked whether the retreat still needed volunteers. She stared at him. You've never volunteered before. I know. He held up a half-finished name badge. I'm discovering I'm not very good with glitter. Naomi burst into laughter. You've got glitter in your hair. He instinctively reached for it. Where? Everywhere. She walked over and gently brushed a few sparkling pieces from his shoulder. You know, you're making those children's name tags. I know. They'll probably remember them for 5 minutes. He smiled. Maybe. She looked into his eyes. But I'll remember this for the rest of my life. Ben's smile softened. That's why I'm doing it. Later that evening, while sorting through another box of supplies, Naomi found an old children's book. The cover was slightly worn. Inside the front page, someone had written in neat blue ink. A child who learns to love stories learns to believe that tomorrow can be different from today. She handed the book to Ben. Read that. He smiled as he finished the sentence. I like that. So do I. Naomi sat beside him. I've always believed stories do more than entertain. They help people imagine a better version of themselves. Ben looked at her thoughtfully. Maybe that's what happened to me. She smiled. What do you mean? I've been listening to your stories. The children. The volunteers. Your memories. My mum's letter. My younger self. He closed the book gently. They all reminded me of the kind of man I wanted to become. Naomi reached for his hand. Then promise me something. What? When life gets busy again. Because it will. Don't wait until we're drifting apart before we have conversations like these. Ben nodded without hesitation. I promise. Then he smiled. And next time I start putting work ahead of us. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Yes? I expect you to tell me. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. I will. It was a simple promise. Yet it represented something neither of them had truly practiced before. Ben promised to listen. Naomi promised to speak. Healing wasn't only changing old habits. It was replacing them with healthier ones. And for the first time in many years, they weren't just rebuilding a marriage. They were learning how to protect it. The morning of the retreat arrived wrapped in crisp autumn air. The sky stretched across Chicago in brilliant shades of blue, while golden leaves drifted lazily from the trees surrounding the retreat center. Families began arriving long before registration opened. Children hurried across the lawn carrying backpacks stuffed with books. Parents balanced picnic baskets, blankets, and travel mugs filled with hot chocolate. Laughter floated through the grounds. It didn't feel like an event. It felt like a reunion. Ben stepped out of his car wearing jeans, trainers, and a simple navy sweatshirt with the Foundation's logo embroidered across the front. He adjusted the volunteer name badge pinned to his chest. It simply read, Ben, no title, no mention of Billionaire, no company logo, just his name. For reasons he couldn't explain, he liked that. Naomi walked over, carrying a box of children's activity packs. She stopped when she saw him. You actually wore it. Ben looked down at the sweatshirt. I figured volunteers should look like volunteers. She smiled. It suits you. I was hoping you'd say that. Olivia approached carrying a clipboard. Morning? Morning, they replied together. Olivia smiled mischievously. I've got jobs for both of you. Ben rubbed his hands together dramatically. I'm ready. Naomi laughed. You say that now. Olivia looked at Ben. You'll be helping families find their cabins. No problem. Then you'll run the storytelling corner after lunch. Ben blinked. I'll what? The storyteller scheduled for this afternoon came down with the flu. He looked alarmed. I've never read to 50 children. Olivia grinned. By the end of today, you'll have. Life has an interesting way of stretching us. Growth rarely happens while we're doing only the things we already know well. Sometimes the greatest confidence comes from stepping into unfamiliar situations with a willing heart. Whether it's learning a new skill, beginning a new career, or rebuilding a relationship, courage usually arrives after we take the first step, not before. Throughout the morning, Ben helped families settle in. He carried luggage, directed cars, played football with a group of energetic boys while they waited for their parents. He helped an elderly grandfather carry 3 heavy boxes into one of the cabins. You don't have to do this yourself, the man said. Ben smiled. I know. I want to. The grandfather nodded approvingly. Your parents raised you well. Ben smiled to himself. I've been reminded of that recently. Near the main hall, Naomi watched from a distance. She wasn't watching because she doubted him. She was watching because she had never seen this version of her husband before. There was no rush in his movements. No phone pressed against his ear. No assistant following behind him. Every conversation received his full attention. Every child who asked him a question received an answer. Every parent who thanked him received a genuine smile. She realized something. This wasn't Ben trying to impress anyone. Hardly anyone there knew who he was. This was simply Ben. Around midday, the retreat officially began. Naomi welcomed everyone from the small outdoor stage. Thank you all for spending your weekend with us. She looked across the crowd of families. In a world filled with distractions, choosing to sit down and read with someone you love is one of the greatest gifts you can give. She smiled warmly. Stories don't just teach children new words. They teach compassion. They encourage imagination. They strengthen families. She paused. And perhaps most importantly, they remind us to listen. The audience applauded. Ben found himself clapping the loudest. After lunch, Olivia walked over carrying a stack of picture books. She handed them to Ben. Your audience is waiting. He looked toward the storytelling tent. Nearly 60 children sat on colorful cushions. Several parents had gathered behind them. Ben swallowed. I suddenly feel more nervous than I did speaking at international conferences. Olivia laughed. Children are the toughest audience. Why? They know immediately if you're pretending. Ben stepped into the tent. The children looked at him expectantly. One little boy raised his hand before Ben had even sat down. Mr. Yes? Are you funny? The entire tent burst into laughter. Ben grinned. I certainly hope so. Another little girl asked, do you do the voices? He looked around dramatically. I suppose there's only one way to find out. The children cheered. He opened the book. At first, his voice sounded hesitant. Then he remembered how Naomi read. She didn't simply read words. She brought them to life. So he tried. He gave each character a different voice. He exaggerated expressions. He made dramatic pauses. Within minutes, the children were completely absorbed. They laughed. They gasped. They answered questions before he asked them. When the story ended, dozens of little hands shot into the air. Another one! Please. Just one more chapter. Ben looked at his watch, then smiled. I think we can manage one more. Across the field, Naomi had just finished a workshop for parents. As families filtered outside, several stopped to speak with her. One father approached carrying his daughter on his shoulders. I wanted to thank you. For what? He smiled. My job keeps me away from home a lot. I always assumed providing for my family was enough. He looked toward the storytelling tent where Ben was surrounded by children. Today reminded me. My daughter doesn't only need what I can buy. She needs my time. Naomi smiled gently. Children spell love in many ways. She looked at his daughter. But one of the simplest is Time. The father nodded thoughtfully. I think we needed to hear that. Education reaches far beyond schools. Some of life's most valuable lessons are learned in parks, around dinner tables, during bedtime stories, and through ordinary conversations. Children don't only remember what adults teach them, they remember what adults model. When they see kindness, they learn kindness. When they see patience, they learn patience. When they see love expressed through time and attention, they learn what healthy relationships look like. As the afternoon drew to a close, Ben wandered toward the lake behind the retreat center. He found Harold sitting quietly on a wooden bench. "Dad?" Harold looked up with a smile. "I wondered when you'd find me. I didn't know you were coming. I wanted to surprise you." Ben sat beside him. For several moments, they watched ducks glide across the water. Finally, Harold spoke. "I watched you today." Ben smiled. "I hope I passed inspection." Harold chuckled. "You reminded me of someone." "Who?" "My son." Ben frowned. "I am your son." Harold laughed. The young man who used to believe success meant making people feel hopeful. Ben stared out across the lake. "I lost sight of him." Harold shook his head. "No, you buried him beneath responsibilities." He placed a gentle hand on Ben's shoulder. "There's a difference." Ben felt emotion rise in his chest. "I've wasted so much time." His father looked at him kindly. "Don't waste today by mourning yesterday." Ben turned toward him. "Then what should I do?" Harold smiled. "Keep becoming the man your wife already believed you could be." Ben followed his father's gaze toward the retreat center. Naomi stood beneath a large oak tree surrounded by children, laughing as they proudly showed her the bookmarks they had made. He smiled. For years, he had chased recognition from strangers. Now he understood something far more valuable. The greatest honor of his life had never been building remarkable buildings. It had been earning the trust of one remarkable woman. And every day from now on, he intended to prove that her faith in him had never been misplaced. As the afternoon sunlight softened into a warm golden glow, the retreat took on an even gentler atmosphere. Children spread blankets across the grass, their noses buried inside colorful storybooks. Parents sat beside them, taking turns reading aloud. Some laughed together. Others paused to discuss the characters. Everywhere Ben looked, he saw conversations. Not rushed conversations, not distracted conversations, the kind that made people feel fully seen. He realized something. The retreat wasn't really about books. The books were simply an invitation. The real purpose was connection. Naomi gathered the volunteers beneath a large maple tree. "I just want to say thank you." Everyone turned toward her. "You've given your entire weekend to families you didn't even know a few days ago." She smiled warmly. "You've carried boxes. You've cleaned tables. You've comforted crying children. You've answered hundreds of questions." She looked around proudly. "And you've done all of it with kindness." The volunteers applauded one another. Ben stood quietly near the back. He wasn't looking at the volunteers. He was looking at Naomi. He had watched her speak to large audiences before, but today felt different. There was no microphone, no cameras, no donors, just sincerity. He wondered how many moments like this he had missed while sitting in boardrooms. Olivia walked over carrying a small wooden box. "I almost forgot." Naomi smiled. "The gratitude cards." Every family had received one upon arrival. The instructions were simple. Before leaving the retreat, each person would write down one thing they appreciated about someone else in their family. The cards would then be exchanged privately. No speeches, no pressure, just honest gratitude. Naomi believed appreciation should never be reserved for special occasions. People deserved to hear they mattered while they were still close enough to hear it. Ben accepted one of the blank cards. He stared at it for several moments. Only a few lines. How difficult could it be? Yet somehow, writing honestly felt harder than delivering a keynote speech. He picked up the pen, then stopped. He crossed out the first sentence. It sounded too formal. He tried again. No, that sounded like an annual report. He laughed quietly at himself. Naomi noticed. Writer's block. He smiled sheepishly. "I think I'm trying too hard." She nodded. "You usually do." He laughed. "So what's the secret?" She thought for a moment. "Write what you'd regret leaving unsaid." He looked down at the card again. This time, the words came naturally. Educational growth often begins with one overlooked habit: expressing appreciation. Many people assume gratitude is something others simply know. But appreciation left unspoken can easily become appreciation unfelt. Whether it's thanking a teacher, a parent, a colleague, or the person who shares your life, speaking gratitude strengthens relationships in ways that silent appreciation never can. Kind thoughts change very little until they become spoken words. When everyone had finished writing, Olivia collected the cards and redistributed them. Naomi smiled as she recognized Ben's handwriting. She quietly unfolded the card. It read, "Naomi, thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself. Thank you for seeing the man beneath the ambition. You never asked me to become someone else. You only asked me not to lose the person you already loved. If I found my way back, it's because you never stopped leaving the light on. Love, Ben." Naomi blinked several times. The words became slightly blurred, not because the ink had faded, because tears had filled her eyes. She pressed the card gently against her heart before folding it carefully. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't poetic. It was honest. And honesty has a way of reaching places that perfection never can. Ben opened the card Naomi had written. Her handwriting remained as elegant as ever. "Ben, I used to believe loving someone meant never letting them see how much they had hurt you. Now I understand that love also requires honesty. Thank you for listening instead of defending. Thank you for choosing to stay in uncomfortable conversations. Most of all, thank you for reminding me that people really can grow. I'm proud of the man you're becoming. Always, Naomi." Ben read it twice, then a third time. The final sentence echoed quietly inside him. "I'm proud of the man you're becoming. Not the man you were. The man you are becoming." She wasn't expecting perfection. She was recognizing progress. And somehow, that made him want to keep growing even more. As families began preparing to leave, one little girl tugged gently on Ben's sleeve. "Mr. Ben?" He knelt beside her. "Yes?" She held up a handmade bookmark decorated with tiny painted stars. "I made this for you." He smiled. "It's beautiful." She pointed toward the storytelling tent. "I liked your dragon voice." He laughed. "I practiced very hard." She looked completely serious. "You should read more books." "I think you're right." She handed him the bookmark. "So you don't forget." Ben accepted it carefully. "I won't." As she skipped back toward her parents, he slipped the bookmark into his wallet. Years ago, his wallet had been filled with business cards, membership cards, airport lounge passes. Now, the thing he wanted to carry most was a child's handmade reminder that the moments which truly mattered could never be bought. Later, while volunteers packed away tables and chairs, Harold slowly walked over, carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed one to Ben. "I've been thinking." Ben smiled. "That usually means advice is coming." Harold chuckled. "Probably." They watched the last families wave goodbye as they drove out through the gates. Finally, Harold spoke. "When your mother was diagnosed." Ben's smile faded. "We knew our time together might be shorter than we'd hoped." He looked down into his tea. "Do you know what she said during one of our last conversations?" Ben shook his head. Harold's voice softened. "She said, 'I don't wish we'd earned more money.'" He paused. "I wish we'd taken even more ordinary walks together." The words settled gently between them. Harold smiled through misty eyes. "That surprised me." "It shouldn't have." He looked at Ben. "People rarely miss achievements at the end of life. They miss moments." Ben followed his father's gaze toward Naomi, who was helping 2 volunteers fold blankets. "I think I'm finally beginning to understand." Harold rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "Then don't just understand it." He smiled warmly. "Live it." Ben nodded. He intended to, because he finally realized something that no business school had ever taught him. The richest life isn't the one filled with the greatest accomplishments. It's the one filled with the greatest presence. And as he watched Naomi laughing with the volunteers beneath the fading autumn sky, he silently promised himself that from this day forward, she would never again have to wonder whether there was room for her in his life. She had never been competing with his success. She had always been the reason it mattered. The drive home was peaceful. Neither of them felt the need to fill every silence with conversation. The weekend retreat had left them pleasantly tired, not the exhaustion that comes from endless work, the kind that comes from investing yourself in people. As they crossed the bridge overlooking the Chicago River, Naomi looked out at the water. "I don't think I've ever seen you smile that much in one weekend." Ben laughed. "I didn't realize I was." "You were." She glanced at him. "My favorite moment?" "When that little boy asked if dragons really liked peanut butter." Ben burst into laughter. "I had absolutely no idea how to answer him." "You told him." She grinned. "That dragons only eat peanut butter on Saturdays." I panicked. "You improvised." "And now, somewhere in Chicago, there's probably a child correcting his teacher." They both laughed until tears gathered in their eyes. It felt wonderfully ordinary and wonderfully familiar. The next morning, Ben arrived at the office carrying the handmade bookmark the little girl had given him. Instead of leaving it inside his wallet, he placed it inside a simple frame on his desk. Claire noticed it almost immediately. I don't think that's a blueprint. Ben smiled. It isn't. She picked it up carefully. The colorful stars surrounded a child's uneven handwriting. Thank you for reading with us. Claire looked at him. That's going to confuse a few clients. I hope it does. She laughed. You're changing. I am. He looked at the bookmark. I need daily reminders of what's important. Claire nodded thoughtfully. We all do. Around midday, Jonathan Pierce stopped by Ben's office. I've got a few minutes. Ben stood. Please, come in. Jonathan noticed the framed bookmark almost immediately. I wasn't expecting to see children's artwork in the CEO's office. Ben smiled. I wasn't expecting it either. Jonathan sat down. I've been thinking about what you said at the board meeting. Ben waited. You've built an extraordinary company. Jonathan folded his hands. But you've also created a culture where everyone believes they have to be available every hour of every day. Ben frowned. I never intended that. I know. Jonathan smiled kindly. Culture isn't created only by policies. It's created by what leaders model. The words settled heavily inside the room. Jonathan continued. When employees see their leader answering emails at midnight, they assume they should too. When they see their leader cancel holidays, they assume family comes second. Ben slowly nodded. I never looked at it that way. I don't think many leaders do. Jonathan stood. If you're learning to build a healthier life. He smiled warmly. Perhaps it's time the company learned with you. After Jonathan left, Ben remained seated for a long time. He realized something unexpected. His choices affected far more than his marriage. Hundreds of employees had quietly shaped their lives around the example he set. If he truly believed balance mattered, he would have to lead differently. Real leadership begins with example. People pay far less attention to what leaders say than to what leaders repeatedly do. Children learn by watching parents. Students learn by watching teachers. Employees learn by watching leaders. Integrity is the distance between our words and our actions. The smaller that distance becomes, the greater our influence. That afternoon, Ben sent a company-wide email. It wasn't about profits, or expansion, or quarterly targets. It contained only a few short paragraphs. To everyone at Whitmore Architecture. Over the past few weeks, I've been reflecting on what success truly means. We've built remarkable projects together, and I'm deeply grateful for your dedication. But I also believe success should never come at the cost of our health, our families, or the people who matter most. Beginning next month, we'll introduce new policies encouraging healthier work-life balance, protected family time, and flexible scheduling where possible. Great buildings are created by people. Let's make sure we're taking care of those people too. Ben Whitmore. He read the email twice, then pressed send. Within minutes, replies began arriving. Some simply said, thank you. Others were longer. One employee wrote, my daughter asked me yesterday why I always eat dinner with my laptop. Your email reminded me that I can choose differently. Ben sat back quietly. He had spent years believing leadership was measured by financial results. Perhaps it was also measured by the lives people were able to live because of the culture he helped create. Meanwhile, Naomi was finishing a reading session with a group of middle school students when one of the boys lingered behind. Mrs. Whitmore? Yes, Caleb. He shifted nervously. My parents argue a lot. Naomi listened carefully. They don't think I hear them. She nodded gently. What makes you want to tell me? He looked down. I don't know how to help. Naomi pulled out a chair beside her. You know something? What? Sometimes children believe it's their job to fix grown-up problems. He nodded slowly. I've thought that. She smiled kindly. But it's not. So, what do I do? You keep being a child. You keep learning. You keep talking to adults you trust whenever your heart feels heavy. Caleb looked relieved. So, I don't have to solve everything? Naomi shook her head. No. Some burdens are simply too heavy for children to carry. He smiled faintly. Thank you. As he walked away, Naomi silently hoped he would remember those words for years to come. That evening, Ben arrived home carrying no flowers, no gifts, just a small folded piece of paper. Naomi looked up from the sofa. What's that? He smiled. A list. She laughed. Should I be worried? I hope not. He handed it to her. At the top, in his neat handwriting, were the words, things I'd still like us to do together. Naomi read the list slowly. Watch the sunrise at Lake Michigan. Take a road trip with no destination. Learn to dance properly. Volunteer together every month. Cook one new recipe every Saturday. read the same book, and talk about it. Visit the little pizza shop near our old apartment. Plant a tree in the garden. Watch old family videos. Grow old without growing apart. Naomi reached the final line and stopped reading. Her eyes filled once again. You made this today? I did. She looked at him. Why? Ben smiled. For years I planned projects. Flights. Meetings. He gently took the paper back and tapped the last line. I realized I'd never planned our joy. Naomi wrapped her arms around him without saying a word. Sometimes the most meaningful promises aren't spoken aloud. Sometimes they're written on an ordinary piece of paper and kept by two people who finally understand that the happiest future isn't built one extraordinary event at a time. It's built through countless ordinary moments, chosen on purpose. Together, winter settled gently over Chicago. Snow covered rooftops like soft white blankets. The branches outside the Whitmore's home sparkled beneath the morning sun. Inside, the house felt different, warmer, not because the heating worked any better, because laughter had slowly found its way back into rooms that had once echoed with silence. Saturday mornings had become sacred. No meetings, no charity galas, no investor calls, no foundation events unless they chose them together. Just time. Ben stood in the kitchen wearing an apron that read, "Kiss the cook. At your own risk." Naomi couldn't stop laughing. I still don't know who bought you that. Ben looked down at himself. I have a suspicion it was Rachel. It definitely was. He carefully flipped a pancake. It landed halfway folded. I think this one's abstract. Naomi smiled. I think it's edible. Barely. She walked over beside him. You know. You're getting better. He grinned proudly. I've only destroyed 2 breakfasts this month. That's progress. It certainly is. After breakfast, they bundled into warm coats and scarves before driving across the city. Their destination wasn't expensive or glamorous. It was the small neighborhood where they had rented their very first apartment. The buildings looked almost exactly the same. The tiny grocery shop still stood on the corner. The laundrette remained open. Even the old bus stop was still there. Ben parked the car. I haven't been here in years. Naomi smiled. I've driven past once or twice. You have? She nodded. It reminds me where we started. They slowly walked hand in hand along the familiar pavement. Everything felt smaller than they remembered. The apartment building, the streets, even the park, where they used to eat lunch. Ben laughed. I could have sworn this hill was enormous. Naomi smiled. We were younger. Everything seemed bigger. Memory has a remarkable way of changing perspective. Places often remain the same size. It is we who grow. Sometimes returning to where we began reminds us not only how far we've traveled, but also which parts of ourselves we should never have left behind. As they reached the corner cafe, Ben stopped walking. It survived. Naomi looked up. So did the owner. Inside, little had changed. The wooden tables remained slightly uneven. The walls still displayed photographs of old Chicago. The rich smell of fresh coffee filled the air. An elderly man looked up from behind the counter. He stared for a moment. Then his face slowly broke into a smile. I don't believe it. Ben blinked. Mr. Alvarez? The old cafe owner laughed. I knew it was you. Ben stepped forward and warmly shook his hand. It's been, what, 20 years? 23. Mr. Alvarez smiled. And you still found your way back. He looked at Naomi. I remember you. She laughed. You used to give us free biscuits. He winked. Because you two always ordered one coffee and shared it. Ben laughed. We couldn't afford to. I know. Mr. Alvarez smiled. But you always looked happier than the customers spending 10 times as much. Those words made both Ben and Naomi glance at each other. Mr. Alvarez carried 2 mugs of coffee to their table. This one's on me. You don't have to. I know. He smiled warmly. I want to. As he walked away, Ben quietly looked around the cafe. Do you remember sitting right there? Naomi nodded immediately. The night your first client signed. You were so excited. I was terrified. She laughed. You hid it well. He smiled. I didn't. You simply pretended not to notice. Naomi looked down at her coffee. I noticed. She stirred it slowly. I just wanted you to feel brave. Ben reached across the table and gently held her hand. I've spent years thanking investors. He smiled sadly. I should have thanked you more. Just then, Mr. Alvarez returned carrying an old cardboard box. I found something while cleaning the storage room last summer. Ben looked puzzled. What is it? The elderly man carefully placed the box on the table. I recognized the handwriting. Naomi looked down. Across the top, written in black marker, were two names, Ben and Naomi. She looked up in surprise. How did this end up here? Mr. Alvarez smiled. You asked me to keep it safe. Ben frowned. We did? Years ago. When you moved into your first office. You said. He laughed softly. That your apartment was too small. I told you I'd keep it, until you came back. Ben looked completely stunned. I honestly don't remember. That's because life became busy. Mr. Alvarez shrugged gently. It happens. He pushed the box towards them. But I think it belongs with you now. Inside the box were little pieces of a life they had almost forgotten. Their first takeaway menu with handwritten calculations on the back. A tiny ceramic ornament Naomi had won at a school fair. An old cassette tape labeled Road Trip Songs. A faded map with circles marking places they wanted to visit one day. A disposable camera still inside its unopened packet. Ben picked it up. We never used this. Naomi smiled. We kept saving it. For the perfect trip. He laughed quietly. And then, smartphones happened. She nodded. So did life. One of the easiest traps to fall into is believing happiness should be postponed. We'll celebrate after the promotion. We'll travel after the project. We'll rest after next month. We'll spend more time together after things calm down. But life rarely becomes less busy on its own. Joy isn't something we find once everything else is finished. It's something we choose to make room for while life is still happening. Near the bottom of the box lay a small notebook. Its cover was worn and slightly bent. Ben opened it carefully. Every page contained handwritten ideas, holiday destinations, future dreams, goals they had made together. Some had little tick marks beside them. Others remained unfinished. One page caught Ben's attention. Across the top, Naomi had written, "Things we promise never to lose." He read them slowly. Our curiosity, our laughter, our honesty, our Friday walks, dinner together whenever possible. The habit of asking each other, "How's your heart today?" Ben stopped reading. He looked at Naomi. "We used to ask that." She smiled softly. "Every Friday." "I completely forgot." "You didn't completely forget." She looked around the little cafe. "You just stopped practicing." Ben closed the notebook carefully. "I think we should start again." Naomi nodded. "I'd like that." He smiled. "So?" He leaned back in his chair. "How's your heart today?" Naomi looked at him for several quiet seconds before answering. "It feels peaceful." "And yours?" Ben didn't rush his answer. For years, he would have responded automatically. "I'm fine. I'm good. Everything's under control." Today, he answered honestly. "It feels grateful." Naomi smiled. "For what?" He looked around the little cafe where so many dreams had begun. "For second chances." He paused. "And for finally understanding that the greatest wealth we ever built wasn't my company." He reached for her hand once more. "It was us." Outside, snow continued falling softly across the streets, where two young dreamers had once walked home sharing one cup of coffee and a future filled with hope. They had returned looking for old memories. Instead, they had rediscovered something even more valuable. The simple truth that love doesn't become extraordinary because life is perfect. It becomes extraordinary because two imperfect people keep choosing each other, again and again. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Mr. Alvarez walked back to their table carrying a small paper bag. "I almost forgot." Ben looked up. "Forgot what?" The elderly man smiled. "Your tradition." He reached inside the bag and placed two warm cinnamon biscuits on the table. Naomi laughed. "You still make these?" "Every morning." Mr. Alvarez folded his arms. "You two always split one." Ben smiled. "We couldn't afford two." "I know." Mr. Alvarez winked. "So today, I'm giving you two." Naomi laughed. "I think we've finally been promoted." The three of them shared a warm laugh before Ben reached for his wallet. Mr. Alvarez gently pushed his hand away. "No. Please. No." Ben looked confused. "You've supported enough people in your lifetime." The old man smiled kindly. "Today." Let an old cafe owner do something kind for two people who once reminded him that happiness doesn't depend on how much money you have. Ben slowly lowered his wallet. "Thank you." Mr. Alvarez nodded. "Promise me something." Ben and Naomi looked at him. "Don't wait another 20 years before coming back." "We won't." "I mean it." "So do we." As they stepped outside, snowflakes drifted lazily around them. Neither hurried toward the car. Instead, they began walking through the neighborhood. The streets were quieter than they remembered. Children built snowmen in front gardens. Someone was hanging Christmas lights across a porch. A young couple hurried past, sharing a single umbrella while laughing about something only they understood. Naomi watched them disappear around the corner. They remind me of us. Ben smiled. They do. She slipped her hand into his coat pocket to warm her fingers. He instinctively intertwined them with his own. Years ago, that gesture had happened without thought. Now, as they reached the small park where they had once spent countless evenings, Ben noticed something still standing beneath the large oak tree. An old wooden bench. Its paint had faded. One armrest leaned slightly to one side. Naomi smiled immediately. Our bench. You remembered? Of course. They brushed away the snow before sitting down. For several moments, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the world continue around them. Children laughing. Dogs chasing snowballs. Parents calling everyone home before dinner. Life. Simple. Ordinary. Beautiful. One of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves is learning to be fully present. Many people spend their lives physically somewhere while mentally somewhere else. Thinking about tomorrow. Regretting yesterday. Planning the next task. Presence is different. Presence says, this moment deserves all of me. Whether you're listening to your child, sharing a meal, walking with someone you love, or simply watching snowfall, life happens only in the present. Ben finally broke the silence. I've been thinking about something. Naomi looked at him. What? If I could speak to the version of me from 6 months ago, I don't think he'd recognize me. She smiled. I think he'd recognize you. You do? He'd just wonder why you looked so much lighter. Ben laughed quietly. I do feel lighter. Why? He thought carefully. Because I'm no longer trying to prove my worth every day. Naomi nodded. And what are you trying to do instead? He looked out across the snow-covered park. I'm trying to live a life I'm proud to remember. When they returned home later that afternoon, they carried the old memory box inside. Neither wanted to place it back into storage. Instead, Naomi set it on the dining table. What should we do with it? Ben looked thoughtfully at the box. I've got an idea. He disappeared upstairs for a few minutes, before returning with another empty wooden chest. It was beautifully crafted, but completely unused. Naomi looked puzzled. What's that? I bought it years ago. For what? I honestly can't remember. She laughed. Well, oh, now it has a purpose. Together, they carefully transferred each keepsake into the larger chest. The old map, the notebooks, the cassette tape, the gratitude jar, the letters, the photographs, the pizza receipt, the unused camera. Each item represented a chapter of their lives, some joyful, some painful, all meaningful. When they finished, Ben placed one final object inside, the handmade bookmark from the little girl at the reading retreat. Naomi looked at him. That belongs too. He smiled. Why? Because our story didn't end with remembering the past. He gently closed the lid. It continued when we chose a different future. Later that evening, Rachel stopped by unexpectedly carrying a homemade apple pie. I come bearing dessert. Naomi laughed. You're always welcome. Rachel placed the pie on the kitchen counter before noticing the wooden chest. What's this? Ben smiled. Our history. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Everything? Not everything. Naomi smiled. Just the parts we never want to lose. Rachel looked around the room. You both seem different. Ben laughed. People keep saying that. They're right. Rachel looked at her brother for a long moment. You know, Mum used to tell me something. What? Rachel smiled. She said marriages don't usually change because one huge miracle happens. Ben waited. They change because two people start making hundreds of tiny decisions in the same direction. Naomi smiled warmly. That sounds exactly like her. Rachel nodded. It does. After Rachel left, Ben and Naomi shared a slice of apple pie in the quiet kitchen. No television, no phones, no interruptions, just conversation. At one point, Naomi looked at the wooden memory chest. You know what we should add? What? She pulled a blank sheet of paper from a nearby drawer. A new promise. Ben smiled. I like that idea. Together, they began writing. Not promises about becoming perfect. Not promises they couldn't realistically keep. Simple promises. We will tell each other the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. We will protect time together instead of waiting for free time to appear. We will celebrate ordinary days. We will ask, how's your heart? Every Friday. We will never assume appreciation has been felt until it has been spoken. Ben looked at the list for a long moment. Then he added one final sentence beneath the others. If we ever begin drifting apart again, we'll reach for each other before the distance becomes silence. Naomi read the words slowly. Then she signed her name. Ben signed beneath hers. Neither of them realized it, but those simple promises would soon be tested in a way neither expected. Because life doesn't stop presenting challenges simply because people have learned important lessons. The true measure of growth isn't how people behave when everything is peaceful. It's whether they remember those lessons when life becomes difficult again. And that opportunity was closer than either of them imagined. 3 days later, the phone rang at 6:17 on a Wednesday morning. The shrill sound echoed through the quiet house. Ben reached instinctively for his mobile. The screen displayed Rachel's name. He answered immediately. "Rachel?" Her voice was calm. Too calm. "Ben." Dad collapsed. Ben sat upright. "What?" "The neighbors found him in the garden. They've taken him to street, Mary's. They think it may have been a mild stroke." Within seconds, both Ben and Naomi were out of bed. No discussion. No hesitation. Naomi was already pulling on a coat while Ben grabbed the car keys. 5 minutes later, they were driving through the still dark streets of Chicago. Neither spoke much. Sometimes love doesn't need conversation. Sometimes it simply moves. The emergency department was unusually quiet for that hour. Rachel stood near the waiting area, clutching a paper cup that had long since gone cold. The moment she saw them, she embraced them both. "How is he?" "The doctors are still examining him." Rachel took a slow breath. "They said he was conscious when the ambulance arrived." Naomi gently squeezed her shoulder. "That's encouraging." Rachel nodded. "It is. But I'm frightened." Naomi wrapped an arm around her. "You don't have to carry that fear by yourself. Hospitals have a way of changing perspective. Inside those walls, deadlines lose their urgency. Titles lose their importance. Arguments suddenly seem much smaller. People stop asking, 'How much have you accomplished?' and begin asking, 'Is the person I love going to be all right?' Moments like these remind us that health and relationships are not guarantees. They are gifts, and gifts should never be taken for granted. Nearly an hour later, the neurologist walked into the waiting room. Everyone stood. "The good news," the doctor smiled reassuringly, "is that Mr. Whitmore is stable." Relief spread across every face. "It appears he suffered a mild stroke. We've acted quickly. We're optimistic about his recovery." Rachel wiped away tears of relief. "Can we see him?" "In a few minutes. But he'll need rest." Harold looked tired when they entered his room. His usual energy had been replaced by quiet fatigue. Yet the moment he saw them, he smiled. "I suppose this is one way to get everyone together." Ben laughed, despite the emotion in his chest. "Only you would make a joke." Harold shrugged weakly. "It wasn't a very good one." Naomi walked over and gently adjusted his blanket. "You frightened us." "I frightened myself." He looked at Ben. "I've been reminded that I'm not 20 anymore." Ben sat beside the bed. "You don't have to pretend you're invincible." Harold smiled. For a while, they simply talked. Not about illness, about ordinary things. The reading retreat, Rachel's children, Mr. Alvarez's cafe, the old photographs. Harold listened with a peaceful smile. "You've both changed." Ben looked at him. "We've been trying." "I can see that." Harold's eyes rested on Naomi. "Thank you." She looked surprised. "For what?" "For helping my son find his way back to himself." Naomi shook her head gently. "He did the hard part." Harold smiled. "No. He simply remembered who he already was." Later that afternoon, while Rachel handled paperwork with one of the nurses, Harold quietly motioned for Ben to stay behind. Naomi noticed and stepped into the corridor to give them privacy. The room became still. Harold looked out the window before speaking. "When I was your age, I thought strength meant handling everything alone." Ben listened quietly. "I didn't tell your mother when I was worried. I thought protecting her meant hiding my fears." He smiled faintly. "She eventually told me something I'll never forget." "What?" "When you hide your struggles from me, you also hide your heart." Ben lowered his eyes. Harold continued. "It took me years to understand what she meant." He looked directly at his son. "Vulnerability isn't weakness. It's an invitation to let the people who love you stand beside you." Ben felt tears gathering again. "I've wasted too much time pretending I was all right." Harold smiled gently. "Then stop pretending. It's exhausting." One of the greatest misconceptions about strength is that it means never needing anyone. Real strength often looks very different. It looks like asking for help, admitting fear, saying, "I'm struggling." Allowing others to support us isn't a burden to them. It is often one of the deepest expressions of trust we can offer. When Ben stepped into the corridor a few minutes later, he found Naomi sitting beside a large window overlooking the hospital garden. She looked up. "Everything okay?" He nodded slowly before sitting beside her. "My dad reminded me of something." "What?" "I've spent years trying to protect you from my worries." Naomi smiled softly. "I know. I thought I was being strong." She reached for his hand. "And now?" "I think I was just being lonely." Naomi gently intertwined her fingers with his. "You know, I used to think love meant carrying someone else's burdens." She looked out toward the winter garden. "Now I think it means helping them carry their own." Ben rested his forehead lightly against hers. "I don't want to do life alone anymore." "You won't." She smiled. "You never actually were." Harold remained in hospital for several days. Each afternoon, Ben closed his laptop at 3 o'clock. No exceptions. He drove straight to the hospital. Sometimes he brought books for his father. Sometimes they played chess. Sometimes they simply sat together watching the snow fall outside. One afternoon, Ben noticed something. The man who had spent a lifetime offering advice no longer filled every silence with words. Instead, Harold seemed content simply sharing the moment. Ben realized he had inherited more from his father than ambition. He had also inherited the quiet tendency to carry too much alone. Thankfully, he now had the chance to inherit something even better: his father's wisdom. On Harold's final evening in hospital, a young nurse stopped Ben in the corridor. "I hope you don't mind me saying this." "Not at all." She smiled. "I've watched your family all week." Ben looked curious. "My job lets me meet hundreds of families every year." "And?" The nurse glanced toward Harold's room. "The happiest families aren't the ones without problems. They're the ones who face problems together." Ben thanked her quietly. As he walked back into his father's room, those words stayed with him. Life would always bring unexpected challenges: illness, loss, disappointment, change. No marriage could prevent those things. But a healthy marriage could make sure neither person had to face them alone. And perhaps that had been the lesson waiting for Ben and Naomi all along. Love wasn't about rescuing each other from every hardship. It was about becoming the safest place to stand when hardship inevitably arrived. Harold returned home on a bright Friday afternoon. The doctors were optimistic. With rest, physiotherapy, and a few lifestyle adjustments, they expected him to make an excellent recovery. Rachel insisted on filling his refrigerator. Naomi organized his medications into clearly labeled containers. Ben quietly installed handrails in the bathroom, while Harold protested that everyone was making far too much fuss. "You know," Harold muttered as Ben tightened the last screw, "I've lived in this house for 48 years without all these handles." Ben smiled without looking up. "And we'd like you to enjoy another 48. Harold laughed. "I appreciate your optimism." By early evening, the house had settled into a peaceful calm. Rachel had taken the grandchildren home. The physiotherapist had left. Even the neighbors who had stopped by with casseroles and flowers had finally said their goodbyes. Harold stood carefully by the living room window, looking out at the garden. The roses survived. Naomi joined him. "They did. They're stronger than they look." She smiled. "So are you." He looked at her thoughtfully. "I've been thinking. That can be dangerous." He chuckled. "Your sense of humor is rubbing off on my son." She laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." Harold became quiet again. "You know, when Helen was alive, we used to argue." Naomi looked at him with surprise. "You did?" "Oh, certainly." He smiled. "Probably more than the children ever realized. I always thought the two of you had the perfect marriage." Harold shook his head gently. "No marriage is perfect." He looked out at the winter garden. "The difference wasn't that we never disagreed. It was that we never stopped believing the relationship was more important than winning the argument." At that exact moment, Ben walked in carrying a tray with tea and biscuits. "What are we talking about?" Harold smiled mischievously. "All the mistakes your mother and I made." Ben laughed. "That sounds educational." "It should be." They settled into the living room together. Snow drifted softly beyond the windows. The fireplace crackled quietly. For a while, they simply enjoyed each other's company. Then, Harold spoke again. "Can I ask you both something?" "Of course," Naomi replied. "If each of you had one chance to change something from the past, what would it be?" The room became thoughtful. Naomi answered first. "I would have spoken sooner." Harold nodded. "About your loneliness?" "Yes." She looked at Ben. "I convinced myself silence was kindness." She smiled sadly. It wasn't. It only made the distance harder to see. Harold turned to his son. And you? Ben didn't hesitate. I would have stopped treating time as though there would always be more of it. Neither Harold nor Naomi interrupted. I kept postponing conversations. Holidays. Simple evenings together. I thought I'd make up for it later. He lowered his eyes. I've realized later isn't a promise. It's only a hope. One of the most valuable habits we can develop is refusing to postpone what truly matters. Many people delay expressing appreciation. They delay forgiveness. They delay making time for family. They assume there will always be another weekend, another holiday, another year. But none of us are promised unlimited tomorrows. The right time to love well is almost always today. The following week brought an unexpected opportunity. Whitmore Architecture was shortlisted for the largest sustainable housing project in the company's history. Winning the contract would make international headlines. Executives filled the boardroom with excitement. Jonathan stood at the front of the room smiling broadly. If we're awarded this project, it will redefine the company. Applause filled the room. Ben smiled. He was genuinely proud. But something about his reaction surprised him. For the first time in decades, the announcement didn't consume his thoughts. He was excited, just not obsessed. Claire noticed. You seem remarkably calm. Ben smiled. I've learned there's a difference between something being important and something being everything. Claire nodded. I like that. So do I. That evening, Ben shared the news with Naomi over dinner. That's incredible. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you. He smiled warmly. Thank you. She studied him for a moment. What? I've been waiting. For what? For you to say. She lowered her voice dramatically. This changes everything. Ben laughed. I probably would have said exactly that a year ago. And now? He looked around their dining room. At the candles, at the homemade soup Naomi had spent the afternoon preparing, at the framed photograph from the reading retreat sitting on a nearby shelf. Then he looked back at her. It changes a project. He smiled gently. It doesn't change everything. Naomi felt an unexpected wave of emotion, not because the company had become less important, but because their marriage no longer felt less important than the company. The following Saturday, Ben and Naomi kept another promise from their list. Watch old family videos. Ben connected an old projector while Naomi found a bowl of popcorn. The lights dimmed. The first grainy footage flickered onto the wall. Their wedding, Rachel laughing during her speech, Harold dancing with Helen, young Ben attempting to carry Naomi across the threshold before almost losing his balance. Naomi burst into laughter. You nearly dropped me. I recovered. Barely. The next video showed their first Christmas together. The tiny apartment. A crooked little tree decorated with handmade ornaments. Ben opening a jumper Naomi had knitted. It was too small. It was. She covered her face, laughing. You still wore it. I couldn't breathe properly. But I wore it. They laughed until tears rolled down their faces. Then another clip appeared. A much younger Naomi was standing in the kitchen, pointing the camera towards Ben. Tell future us something. Young Ben looked straight into the camera. He smiled with complete confidence. If you're watching this, I hope we still laugh this much. The room became completely still. Present day, Ben stared at the younger version of himself. The innocence, the certainty, the uncomplicated joy. Naomi quietly reached for his hand. Without taking his eyes off the screen, Ben whispered, I think he'd be proud of us now. Naomi squeezed his hand. I think so too. The projector continued playing forgotten memories across the wall. But neither of them watched every scene. They spent much of the evening simply talking, remembering, laughing, sometimes crying. Because healing isn't only about leaving pain behind. It's also about rediscovering the beautiful parts of your story that pain almost made you forget. And as the final video faded into darkness, Ben realized something he wished he had understood years earlier. The greatest moments of his life had never asked for his perfection. They had only ever asked for his presence. Spring arrived almost unnoticed. The snow melted. The gardens slowly awakened. Tiny green shoots pushed through the earth where only weeks earlier everything had seemed lifeless. Naomi stood on the back patio one Saturday morning, smiling as she watched the first tulips begin to bloom. Ben stepped outside carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He handed one to her. I've been looking for you. I wanted to see if the flowers survived the winter. He looked toward the garden. They did. She smiled. So did we. Neither of them said another word for a moment. Sometimes healing isn't announced with fireworks. Sometimes it quietly blooms, almost unnoticed, until one day you realize the landscape has completely changed. Later that morning, Ben disappeared into the garage. Nearly an hour passed before Naomi heard him call her name. "Can you come out here?" She opened the garage door. Ben stood beside several wooden boards, bags of soil, gardening tools, and a young maple tree waiting to be planted. She smiled immediately. "You remembered." He grinned. "It was on our list." She laughed softly. "Plant a tree in the garden. I figured we'd been putting it off long enough." They spent the next 2 hours working side by side. Neither of them knew much about gardening. Ben dug the hole far too deep. Naomi accidentally tore open an entire bag of compost. At one point, they argued, good-naturedly, about which direction the tree should face. "Trees don't have a front," Ben insisted. "They absolutely do." "They do not." "They do." He finally surrendered with exaggerated drama. "Fine. The tree may face whichever direction makes it happiest." Naomi laughed so hard she nearly dropped the watering can. Life has a gentle way of teaching us through nature. A tree doesn't become strong overnight. Its roots grow quietly, long before anyone admires its branches. Relationships are much the same. People often notice the visible moments, the anniversaries, celebrations, and photographs. But lasting love is built beneath the surface, through countless unseen acts of patience, honesty, forgiveness, and consistency. Strong roots create lasting growth. When they finally finished, the young maple tree stood proudly in the center of the garden. Ben stepped back. "It looks small." Naomi smiled. "So did our first apartment." He laughed. "Fair point." She rested a hand lightly against the trunk. "We probably won't live long enough to see it at its fullest." Ben looked at the little tree. "No. But maybe someone else will." Naomi nodded. "I like that." He looked at her thoughtfully. "I think that's what love is." She turned. "What do you mean?" "Planting things you may not personally benefit from." She smiled. "So the people who come after you can enjoy the shade." Ben nodded. "Exactly." A few days later, Whitmore Architecture officially won the sustainable housing contract. The announcement dominated business news. Reporters filled the company's lobby. Television crews waited outside. Employees applauded as Ben entered the headquarters. Jonathan shook his hand. "Congratulations. We've achieved something remarkable." "We have." Journalists gathered for a press conference. One reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Whitmore, what do you consider the biggest reason for your company's success?" The younger version of Ben would have answered differently. He might have spoken about strategy, innovation, long working hours, determination. Instead, he paused, then smiled. "I've spent a long time believing success was about working harder than everyone else." The room became quiet. "I've learned something different." "What?" "It's about building healthy people." He looked around the room. Healthy people build healthy teams. Healthy teams build healthy companies. And healthy companies create better communities. Several reporters looked surprised. Another journalist asked, "Has something changed your perspective?" Ben smiled. "Someone reminded me that success means very little if the people you love don't get to enjoy it with you." He didn't mention Naomi by name. He didn't need to. She was standing quietly near the back of the room. Their eyes met. She smiled. He smiled back. The cameras captured the moment. Most viewers would remember the announcement about the housing project. Ben would remember something else entirely. The quiet smile from the woman who had believed in him long before the headlines ever did. True success should improve more than our careers. It should improve our character. If achievement makes us wealthier but less patient, more recognized but less present, more admired but less kind, then we should pause and ask whether we've confused success with accumulation. The best achievements enrich both our lives and the lives of the people around us. Several weeks later, the Literacy Foundation celebrated its 15th anniversary. Families filled the community center. Former students returned as adults. Some arrived wearing university sweatshirts. Others brought young children of their own. One young woman approached Naomi carrying a toddler. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Naomi looked at her carefully. Then her face lit up. "Emily?" The young woman laughed. "You remembered." "Of course I did." Emily wiped away emotional tears. "You taught me to love reading." She looked down at her little daughter. "Now I read to her every night." Naomi smiled. "That's the greatest gift you could give her." Emily nodded. "I wanted you to know." "Because one teacher believed in me." "My daughter is growing up believing in herself." After Emily walked away, Ben quietly stepped beside Naomi. You've changed generations. Naomi shook her head gently. No, I simply planted seeds. He looked around the room. And now you're watching a forest grow. She smiled. I suppose I am. As the celebration drew to a close, Olivia invited Ben to say a few words. He looked surprised. I wasn't expecting to speak. You don't need a speech. Just tell everyone what's on your heart. Ben stood before the small crowd. For a moment, he simply looked around the room. Children, parents, teachers, volunteers, former students, his father, Rachel, Naomi. He smiled. When I first came here, I thought this place was about teaching children to read. Soft laughter rippled through the audience. I was wrong. He looked toward Naomi. This place teaches people how to pay attention, to listen, to encourage, to believe in one another. He paused. And somewhere along the way, it taught me how to become a better husband. The room became wonderfully quiet. Ben turned fully towards Naomi. There was a time when I thought providing for my family was the greatest expression of love. He smiled gently. I've learned that presence is every bit as important. He looked back at the audience. So, if you leave with only one lesson today, let it be this. Tell the people you love that they matter. Don't assume they already know. Show up. Listen. Put your phone down. Ask how their heart is. He smiled. One ordinary conversation can change a life. The audience rose in heartfelt applause. Naomi stood there, her eyes shining, not because her husband had delivered a perfect speech, but because every word he spoke was now something he genuinely lived, and that made all the difference. A month after the Foundation's anniversary celebration, Whitmore Architecture hosted its annual Leadership and Innovation Gala. It had become one of the most anticipated business events in Chicago. Executives traveled from across the country. Community leaders attended. University students were invited to observe emerging leadership practices. Journalists filled the ballroom long before the program began. For Ben, the event felt strangely familiar. It was the same hotel, the same grand ballroom, the same glittering chandeliers, the same elegant stage. It was also the place where everything had quietly begun to change months earlier. The place where he had introduced Claire as everything I wanted in a leader. The place where Naomi had simply smiled and nodded. Tonight felt different. Not because the room had changed, because he had. Naomi adjusted the sleeve of her midnight blue evening gown as they waited near the entrance. Ben looked at her and smiled. You know, what? I still think you're the most beautiful person in every room. She laughed softly. You've become quite the charmer. I've become more observant. She smiled. I'll accept that. Before they entered, Ben gently reached for her hand. Not because cameras were waiting. Not because anyone was watching. Simply because it felt natural. Naomi squeezed his hand. Months ago, she might have wondered whether the gesture was for appearances. Tonight, she knew better. Inside, Claire was speaking with several young architects. She noticed Ben and Naomi approaching and excused herself. You both look wonderful. Naomi hugged her warmly. So do you. Claire smiled. I've been looking forward to tonight. Ben laughed. I remember saying that once. Claire grinned. This time, you actually look like you mean it. The evening unfolded with speeches, presentations and awards celebrating innovative community projects. One by one, leaders took the stage. Many spoke about technology, growth, expansion, market, success. Ben listened politely. Then his name was announced. The room erupted into applause. He walked to the podium. For a brief moment, he simply looked around the ballroom. Hundreds of faces looked back at him. He smiled. When I stood on this stage last year, I spoke about vision. I spoke about excellence. I spoke about building extraordinary organizations. He paused. I believed every word. The audience listened attentively. But, over the past year, I've discovered that leadership begins somewhere much quieter. He looked across the room until his eyes found Naomi. It begins at home. The ballroom became completely still. Success means very little if it only improves one part of our lives. Real success allows us to become better partners, better parents, better friends, better neighbors. Achievement should expand our capacity to love well, not diminish it. The greatest accomplishments are those that strengthen both our character and our relationships. Ben continued. I've spent most of my career believing I was building a legacy. He smiled gently. I've realized that buildings aren't my legacy. People are. Our employees. Our communities. Our families. He looked towards the young professionals seated near the front. So, tonight, I'd like to speak especially to those who are just beginning their careers. Several younger guests leaned forward. Work hard. Dream boldly. Pursue excellence. But never believe that the people waiting for you at home can simply be placed on hold until you're successful. He paused. They are part of your success. Applause filled the room. Not loud, not dramatic, the kind that came from genuine agreement. When the speech ended, guests gathered for dinner. Several university students approached Ben. One young man looked nervous. Mr. Whitmore? Please. Ben smiled. Call me Ben. The student nodded. I wanted to ask something. Go ahead. I'm graduating this year. I've been offered an amazing job. Congratulations. Thank you. The young man's smile faded slightly. The problem is, everyone keeps telling me I'll have to sacrifice everything if I want to become successful. Ben looked thoughtfully at him. What do you think? I don't know. Ben smiled kindly. I think there will be seasons when you'll work incredibly hard. The student nodded. That's true. But don't confuse temporary sacrifice with permanent neglect. The young man listened carefully. Ben continued. Build your career. But don't accidentally build a life where the people you love only get the version of you that's too tired for everyone else. The student's eyes widened slightly. I've never heard anyone put it like that. Ben smiled. I wish someone had told me. Across the ballroom, Naomi watched the conversation quietly. Claire walked over beside her. You know, Naomi looked at her. I've been thinking about that night. Naomi smiled knowingly. The first gala. Claire nodded. I worried I'd somehow damaged your marriage. Naomi shook her head gently. No, you didn't. Claire looked relieved. I simply revealed something we needed to face. She smiled warmly. And strangely. I'm grateful. Claire laughed softly. I never imagined I'd become part of someone else's marriage story. Naomi smiled. You weren't part of the problem. You were part of the wake-up call. Later that evening, the event host announced a special recognition award. We'd like to honor someone whose leadership has transformed not only an organization, but also the culture surrounding it. A large screen displayed photographs, employees volunteering, flexible family events, community housing projects, literacy programs, parents attending company family days. The final image showed Ben reading to children during the retreat. The audience smiled. The presenter continued. This year's Community Leadership Award goes to... A pause. Benjamin Whitmore. Applause thundered through the ballroom. Ben looked genuinely surprised. I wasn't expecting this. Jonathan handed him the award. You've earned it. Ben accepted it before walking slowly back to the microphone. He looked down at the engraved plaque, then smiled. I'd like to dedicate this to someone. The audience became quiet once more. He looked directly at Naomi. My wife. Naomi's eyes widened. For years, she showed me the difference between building a successful career and building a meaningful life. He smiled gently. Unfortunately, I was a slow learner. The room laughed warmly, but she never stopped believing I could learn. Naomi quietly wiped away a tear. Ben continued. If you admire anything about the leader I've become, you should know. It first existed because of the woman who kept believing in the man I almost forgot to be. The applause that followed seemed to last forever, not because it was a grand romantic moment, but because everyone in the room recognized its sincerity. After the gala ended, Ben and Naomi stepped outside into the cool evening air. The city lights reflected across the river. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Naomi smiled. Do you remember what happened the last time we left this hotel? Ben nodded. I do. I was terrified we'd reached the end. He gently took both of her hands. And now? She looked at him with peaceful certainty. Now I know we simply reached the beginning of a different kind of marriage. Ben smiled. So do I. As they began walking towards the car, neither noticed the photographers capturing images behind them. The newspapers would report on the award, the speech, the business achievements, but the most important story would never appear in the headlines. It was the quiet story of two people who had discovered that love doesn't survive because life becomes easier. It survives because two hearts continue choosing each other, especially on the ordinary days, when no one else is watching. The weeks following the gala settled into an unremarkable rhythm. And that was exactly what made them beautiful. There were no dramatic speeches, no emotional breakthroughs, no grand surprises waiting around the next corner. Just life. Monday morning breakfasts, Friday evening walks, Saturday cooking experiments that usually ended with flour covering half the kitchen. Sunday afternoons spent visiting Harold or volunteering at the Literacy Foundation. Months earlier, Ben might have described those routines as ordinary. Now, he understood they were extraordinary, precisely because they were ordinary. One Friday evening, just before sunset, Ben and Naomi kept another promise from their handwritten list. They drove to the shore of Lake Michigan carrying 2 folding chairs and a picnic basket. The beach was nearly empty. Only a handful of people remained, watching the sky slowly transform into brilliant shades of gold, orange, and deep crimson. Naomi spread a blanket across the sand. Ben unpacked sandwiches, fruit, and 2 thermoses of hot chocolate. She laughed. "You've become very good at picnics. I've had an excellent teacher." "I don't remember teaching you. You taught me by showing me that simple moments deserve planning too." She smiled. "I like that." "So do I." They sat quietly watching the waves. Eventually, Naomi broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "What do you think would have happened if we hadn't attended that first gala?" Ben thought carefully. "I think," he looked out across the water. "We would have continued loving each other." Naomi nodded slowly. "But we might have continued misunderstanding each other." He smiled sadly. "I would have kept believing I was giving you everything. And I would have kept pretending I needed nothing more." Naomi rested her head gently against his shoulder. "I'm glad we stopped pretending." "So am I." One of the healthiest habits any relationship can develop is regular reflection. Not asking, "Who's right?" but asking, "Are we becoming the people we hope to be?" Growth isn't measured only by solving problems. It's measured by intentionally learning from them. Healthy couples don't avoid difficult conversations. They return to them with greater wisdom, greater kindness, and greater understanding. A gentle breeze carried the sound of children laughing somewhere farther down the beach. Ben watched a little boy struggling to fly a bright red kite. Each attempt ended the same way. The kite rose for only a few seconds before tumbling back onto the sand. The boy sighed dramatically. His father knelt beside him. Neither of them could hear the conversation, but they watched as the father smiled, adjusted the string, and encouraged him to try again. A few moments later, the kite soared high above the shoreline. The little boy jumped with excitement. Ben smiled. "What are you thinking?" Naomi asked. He pointed toward the sky. "That father." She watched them. "He never took the kite away." "No. He simply stayed beside his son until he learned." Naomi smiled. "That's encouragement." Ben nodded. "I used to think love meant fixing everything. And now? I think love sometimes means standing beside someone while they discover they can do it themselves." Naomi looked at him proudly. "You've learned that well." Later that evening, as they packed their things, Ben reached into his coat pocket. "I almost forgot." He handed Naomi a small envelope. She looked at him curiously. "What is it?" "Open it." Inside was a simple folded sheet of paper. At the top, in Ben's handwriting, were the words, "Friday questions." Naomi smiled before she even began reading. The list contained only 5 questions. "How's your heart today? What made you smile this week? What challenged you this week? Is there anything you've been carrying alone? How can I love you better next week?" Naomi looked up. "You made these?" "I wanted us to keep asking." She folded the paper carefully. "I think we should frame it." He laughed. "I was hoping you'd say that." The following Tuesday, Whitmore Architecture held its quarterly leadership meeting. Executives gathered as usual. Project updates were presented. Financial reports were reviewed. Then Jonathan stood. "Before we finish, I'd like to share something." He held up a folder. "Our employee well-being survey." Several executives nodded. Jonathan smiled. "The highest results in company history." Applause filled the room. Claire looked at Ben. "It seems your changes are working." Jonathan continued. "Staff reported feeling more supported. Absenteeism has decreased. Retention has improved." He closed the folder. "It turns out, when people are encouraged to have healthy lives outside work, they often do better work inside it." Ben smiled quietly. It confirmed something he had come to believe deeply. Kindness and excellence were never enemies. They strengthened each other. Education often challenges the myths we quietly accept without questioning. For years, many workplaces believed exhaustion proved commitment. That constant availability proved dedication. That rest reduced productivity. Increasingly, both research and experience have shown something different. People think more clearly, lead more wisely, and care more deeply when they are healthy, physically, emotionally, and relationally. Success grows best in healthy soil. That evening, Naomi arrived home carrying an unexpected package. It came this afternoon. Ben looked at the sender. There wasn't one. He carefully opened the box. Inside lay a beautifully bound book. Its title was embossed in gold lettering, The Whitmore Story. Ben frowned. We didn't order this. Naomi gently lifted the cover. The first page contained a handwritten note. Every family has a story worth remembering. Don't wait until memories begin fading before writing them down. A friend. They looked at each other. Neither recognized the handwriting. As they turned the pages, they realized the book was completely blank. Every page, every chapter, waiting. Naomi smiled. I think I know what this is. What? An invitation. Ben looked puzzled. To do what? She picked up a pen from the coffee table and placed it in his hand. To keep writing. He smiled slowly. Not just with words. She nodded. With the way we live. Ben opened to the very first blank page. For a long moment, he simply stared at it. Then he wrote one sentence. The most important chapter of our marriage began the day we stopped trying to win and started trying to understand. Naomi read it. Then, beneath his sentence, she added her own. Love isn't something we finally master. It's something we choose to practice, one ordinary day at a time. They closed the book together. Neither of them knew how many pages they would eventually fill, but for the first time in many years, they weren't afraid of the chapters still waiting to be written, because whatever the future held, they had finally learned how to face it. Together, nearly a year passed. Not a perfect year, just a real one. There were unexpected deadlines. A burst pipe in the house that turned an ordinary Tuesday into organized chaos. A disagreement over whether Ben was taking on too many community projects. Naomi caught the flu one winter. Harold needed another round of physical therapy. Life never stopped presenting challenges. The difference was no longer the challenges. It was how they faced them. Together. One rainy Thursday evening, Ben arrived home later than expected. Traffic had been backed up across the city after an accident. His phone battery had died during his final meeting. By the time he walked through the front door, it was nearly 9 o'clock. A year earlier, he would have quietly assumed Naomi understood. She always had. Tonight was different. He found her reading in the living room. I'm sorry. She looked up from her book. For what? I should have borrowed someone's phone. I should have found a way to let you know. Naomi smiled gently. I was worried. I know. He sat beside her. I don't want you wondering where I am. She closed her book. Thank you for saying that. He looked surprised. You aren't upset? She shook her head. No. You communicated. You apologized without making excuses. She reached for his hand. That's very different from pretending nothing happened. Ben smiled. I guess we're both still learning. We always will be. Growth doesn't eliminate mistakes. It changes how we respond to them. Healthy relationships are not built by two people who never disappoint each other. They are built by two people who learn to repair the moments when disappointment happens. Repair is one of love's most powerful skills. The following Saturday, Harold invited everyone to lunch. His strength had returned remarkably well. He still walked a little more slowly than before, but his smile remained exactly the same. As everyone gathered around the dining table, Harold tapped his glass lightly. I have an announcement. Rachel laughed. You're getting married again? Harold looked horrified. One wife was enough to keep me humble. The room erupted with laughter. He smiled. I've decided to donate your mother's workshop. Ben looked surprised. The whole building? Harold nodded. To the Literacy Foundation. Naomi blinked. Harold. You don't have to do that. I know. He smiled warmly. I want to. Everyone grew quiet. He looked at Naomi. Helen believed education changed lives. She'd be happier knowing that little workshop keeps teaching people long after we're gone. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. Harold reached across the table and gently patted her hand. Then don't. Just promise me you'll fill it with hope. I promise. Several months later, the old workshop reopened. Not as a workshop, as the Helen Whitmore Learning House. Children gathered there after school. Parents attended evening reading classes. Teenagers received tutoring. Retired teachers volunteered. The building that had once echoed with the sound of woodworking tools now echoed with turning pages, laughter, and conversation. At the opening ceremony, a bronze plaque was unveiled. It read, "Dedicated to Helen Whitmore, who believed that kindness, curiosity and education could outlive any one lifetime." Harold quietly wiped away a tear. "So would your mum." Ben looked at the plaque. "I hope we're honoring her well." Harold smiled. "You are." After the ceremony, a local television reporter approached Ben. "Mr. Whitmore, one last question." He smiled. "Go ahead." "Our viewers have followed your remarkable business journey for years." She glanced around the learning center. "But lately, your interviews seem to focus much more on family and community." She tilted her head. "What changed?" Ben didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked through the large windows. Naomi was sitting on the floor with a group of children reading a picture book. She was laughing as one little boy insisted on giving every animal in the story a ridiculous voice. Ben smiled. Then he turned back to the reporter. "I used to think success answered the question. Oh, what have I achieved?" He paused. "Now I think a better question is, who is better because I was here?" The reporter lowered her microphone slightly. "That's a beautiful answer." Ben smiled. Education leaves its deepest mark when knowledge becomes action. It's one thing to understand that relationships require attention. It's another thing to consistently give that attention. Character isn't built in moments of inspiration. It's built in the habits we practice long after inspiration fades. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Ben and Naomi remained inside the learning center. The rooms were finally quiet. Children's drawings covered the walls. Books filled every shelf. Soft lamplight warmed the reading corner. Naomi walked slowly through the building. "It's everything Helen would have loved." Ben nodded. "I think so too." She stopped beside one wall where volunteers had created a display titled, "What Reading Means to Me." Children had written their answers on colorful paper leaves. Ben read a few aloud. "Reading helps me dream. Books make me feel brave. Stories remind me I'm not alone." Then he stopped at one written in careful, uneven handwriting. "When grown-ups read with me, I know they love me." He stared at the sentence for a long time. Naomi slipped her hand into his. "No award you've ever received could mean more than that." He smiled quietly. "No, it couldn't." As they switched off the lights and stepped outside into the cool evening air, Ben looked back through the windows one last time. A year ago, he believed his greatest achievement was designing buildings that would stand for generations. Now, he understood something even more meaningful. The strongest foundations were never made of concrete. They were built from trust, patience, presence, and love. Those were the structures most worth protecting. And unlike any skyscraper, they could become stronger with every passing year. 5 years later, the maple tree in the garden was finally tall enough to cast shade across part of the lawn. It wasn't enormous, not yet, but its roots had taken hold. Every spring its branches stretched a little farther. Every autumn its leaves painted the garden with brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Ben often smiled whenever he looked at it. It reminded him that the most meaningful growth is usually too gradual to notice, day by day. Only when we pause and look back do we realize how much has changed. On a warm Saturday afternoon, laughter drifted through the Whitmore's garden. Children from the Helen Whitmore Learning House had gathered for the annual family reading picnic. Blankets covered the grass. Parents read aloud beneath the trees. Teenagers volunteered at craft tables. Harold sat proudly beneath the maple tree, surrounded by children insisting that he tell them stories about what Mr. Ben was like when he was little. Harold chuckled. "You really want to know?" "Yes." He thought broccoli was poisonous. The children erupted with laughter. Ben, carrying a tray of lemonade across the garden, stopped mid-step. "Dad." Harold grinned. "What?" "History deserves honesty." Naomi laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. "I suddenly understand where your storytelling talent comes from. Life has a beautiful way of proving that joy multiplies when it is shared. Achievements often belong to individuals, but meaningful lives are built in community. The happiest memories rarely involve standing alone on a stage. They usually involve sitting around a table, walking through a park, reading to a child, or laughing with people who know us well enough to love both our strengths and our imperfections." As the afternoon continued, Olivia approached carrying a clipboard. "I have exciting news." Naomi looked up. "What happened?" "The Learning House has officially helped over 10,000 families." Naomi covered her mouth. 10,000? Olivia nodded proudly. "Books, tutoring, family programs, adult literacy classes." She smiled. "It all adds up." Ben looked around the garden. 10,000 families. Naomi quietly shook her head. "I never dreamed." You never stopped planting seeds. Ben finished gently. She smiled at him. And apparently, some of them became forests. Later, after the families had gone home and volunteers finished cleaning up, Ben and Naomi wandered into the garden. The evening sun hung low in the sky. Everything felt peaceful. Ben looked toward the maple tree. It finally gives shade. Naomi smiled. It does. He laughed softly. Remember when I thought it was too small? I remember telling you to be patient. You were right. She smiled playfully. I usually am. He laughed. I've learned that too. They settled onto a wooden bench beneath the tree. For several quiet minutes, they simply watched the breeze move through the branches. Finally, Ben spoke. Can I ask you one more Friday question? Naomi smiled. Even though it's Saturday, I think we can bend the rules. She nodded. Go ahead. He looked at her with the same quiet sincerity she had come to love. How's your heart today? Naomi didn't answer immediately. She looked around the garden, the learning house in the distance, the children who had filled it with laughter only hours before, Harold talking with Rachel on the porch, the maple tree they had planted together. Then she looked back at Ben. It feels home. Ben smiled. Mine too. A gentle silence settled between them. Not the silence that had once grown from distance. The silence that grows from peace. After a while, Naomi turned towards him. Can I tell you something? Always. The first night at that gala. And she smiled faintly. When you praised Claire and called her everything you wanted in a leader. Ben lowered his eyes. I remember. I saw everyone watching me. I remember. They expected me to be angry. He nodded slowly. I expected that too. Naomi reached for his hand. But when I looked at Claire, I realized something. Ben listened carefully. I wasn't threatened by her. You weren't? She shook her head. No. I was frightened by what your words revealed. She smiled gently. They showed me how invisible I'd quietly begun to feel. Ben squeezed her hand. I'm sorry. I know, she smiled. And that's no longer our story. He looked at her. What is our story now? Naomi's answer came without hesitation. That two imperfect people were brave enough to stop pretending. As twilight settled over the garden, Ben stood. Wait here. He disappeared into the house for a moment, before returning carrying the beautifully bound book that had arrived anonymously years before. The Whitmore story. He sat back down beside Naomi and opened to the final blank page. There are only 2 pages left. She smiled. I noticed. He handed her the pen. I think you should write the last sentence. Naomi looked at the empty page for a long time. Then she began to write. When she finished, she handed the book back to Ben. He read the words slowly. Love isn't proven by never drifting apart. It's proven by having the courage to find each other again, before it's too late. Ben felt emotion rise in his chest. Beneath her words, he added his own. And if I leave behind any legacy at all, I hope people remember not the buildings I designed, but the people I finally learned to truly see. He gently closed the book. Neither of them felt the need to write another word. Some stories don't end because everything becomes perfect. They end because the people inside them have become honest. As darkness settled over the garden, the porch light came on automatically. Ben noticed it immediately. He smiled. You still leave the light on. Naomi looked towards the house. I probably always will. He wrapped an arm gently around her shoulders. I'm home. She rested her head against him. I know, and for the first time in many years, there was no distance left to cross. No unspoken apology waiting to be made. No silent loneliness hiding beneath polite conversations. Only 2 people who had discovered that love is not sustained by grand declarations. It is sustained by daily choices, by listening before speaking, by expressing gratitude before assuming it is understood, by making time before time slips away, by asking week after week, how's your heart today? The billionaire who once believed success was measured by the height of the buildings he created eventually discovered a far greater truth. The strongest foundation he ever built was never made of steel or stone. It was built inside his own home. And because he finally learned to protect it, everything else in his life became richer. Not because he earned more, but because he was fully present to enjoy what had mattered all along. What a remarkable journey. Ben and Naomi's story reminds us that the strongest relationships aren't built by perfect people. They're built by 2 people who keep choosing each other, even after they've lost their way. Now I'd love to hear from you. What was the most powerful moment in this story? Was it the letter from Ben's younger self, Helen's timeless advice, the gratitude jar, the reading retreat, or the moment Ben finally realized that presence is just as valuable as provision. And here's a question for all of us. Do you believe love can truly be rebuilt after emotional distance, or do you think some relationships become too broken to heal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story or perspective might give hope to someone who needs it today. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another unforgettable story filled with love, redemption, second chances, and meaningful life lessons. If you know someone who's so busy building a career that they may be forgetting to build their relationships, share this story with them. Sometimes, one story can start a conversation that changes a life. Thank you for spending this journey with us. Until our next story, remember this: success may build a fortune, but love, presence, kindness, and time build a life worth remembering.